Imagine lying in bed at night, your eyes wide open, your thoughts spinning like a wheel that won't stop turning. You try to rest, but all you feel is the weight of your problems, your worries, your pain. Maybe it's regret, maybe it's fear, maybe you're just tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. But what if I told you that suffering, the very thing you're trying to escape, could actually be your greatest teacher? Tonight, you're going to hear ancient Buddhist wisdom that doesn't just explain why we suffer, but how that suffering can become the path to growth, strength, and inner peace. These aren't just calming words. They are powerful teachings passed down for thousands of years that can help you let go, reflect deeply, and slowly begin to transform the pain inside you. So, get comfortable. Let your body relax. Let your breath slow down. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a bedtime story. It's a path forward. A way to fall asleep, not with stress, but with purpose. Before we begin, make a quiet promise to yourself. Say it in your mind or write it down. Starting tonight, I choose to grow through my pain. I am ready. You're not just saying words, you're opening a door. Now take a deep breath. Let's begin. There's a quiet moment that hits us when the noise fades, when distractions fall away, and we're left alone with our own thoughts. It's in that silence that something deeper rises. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that brings discomfort. A feeling in the chest, a tightness in the throat. That's suffering. And even if no one else sees it, we carry it everywhere. Loss, fear, loneliness, failure. It's all part of it. We're taught to fight it, hide it, escape it. But what if we've been looking at suffering the wrong way all along? What if suffering isn't a mistake, but the very thing meant to wake us up? In Buddhism, this isn't just an idea. It's the very first truth the Buddha ever shared, not to make us sad or hopeless, but to start showing us the way out. This is where real transformation begins, not by avoiding suffering, but by seeing it clearly and understanding what it's trying to teach us. Dukkha is the word used in the original teachings. It's often translated as suffering, but it means more than just pain. It speaks to the deep unease of life itself. That feeling that something is missing, that no matter how hard we try, we can't seem to hold on to happiness for long. Even the good times fade. That's dukkha. It's not a flaw in you. It's not a punishment. It's part of being human. And once we stop running from it, we can begin to walk through it. The Buddha didn't say life might include suffering. He said it does. It's the first noble truth. Life involves dukkha. But what most people miss is this. He didn't stop there. He taught it because he wanted us to understand that if we can see suffering for what it really is, it stops controlling us. It starts guiding us. When we stop blaming life for being hard and instead ask why it feels hard, something changes. Suddenly, every painful moment becomes a mirror. Every struggle becomes a lesson. And that's when we begin to grow. But this doesn't mean we accept suffering and just sit in it. That's not what the Buddha taught. He never said, stay in your pain. He said, understand it. That's the key. When we understand suffering, it starts to dissolve. And more than that, it starts to show us the way to freedom. Suffering teaches us how much we cling. It shows us where we attach our happiness to things that don't last. A relationship, a title, a dream of how life should be. And when those things shift, or break, or disappear, we break with them. Not because life is cruel, but because we never learned how to hold life gently. We hold tight, and tight things crack. Dukkha also exposes the illusion of control. So much of our pain comes from thinking we can make life perfect, if only we work hard enough or love hard enough. But life doesn't work that way. It's always changing. People leave, bodies get sick, plans fail. The weather doesn't care how much we prepared, and so the more we demand control, the more life resists. That resistance is dukkha too. But again, it's not punishment. It's a signal. Like pain in the body tells you something's wrong, dukkha in the heart tells you something's misunderstood. It's your first teacher, not the one you wanted, but the one you needed. This teaching isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up to the truth that no one escapes pain. Not the rich, not the powerful, not even the ones who seem to have it all together. The question isn't if we'll suffer. The question is whether we'll grow from it or shrink because of it. And growth only starts when we look directly at dukkha, not with fear, but with curiosity. Why does this hurt? What am I holding on to? What was I expecting? What story am I telling myself? These questions aren't easy, but they're honest, and honesty is the first light in the dark. In Buddhist practice, we learn to stay present with pain, not because we like it, but because pretending it's not there only gives it more power. Suffering grows stronger when ignored, but when met with awareness, it softens. Not overnight, but slowly. It becomes something you can sit with, something you can understand, and then something you can learn from. The practice of mindfulness is deeply connected to this. When we sit quietly and simply observe our thoughts, we begin to see that most of our suffering isn't in the event itself. It's in our resistance to it. It's in the thought, this shouldn't be happening. It's in the fear that it'll never end, or the anger that it ever began. That's where the true weight lies. So when you watch your mind during suffering, you begin to notice that the pain is real, but the story around it is optional. The belief that I'm broken, or this means my life is ruined, that's not the pain, that's the second layer. That's the mind trying to explain or fix something it doesn't want to feel. The Buddha called this the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain. The second arrow is how we react to it. And most of the time, the second arrow is sharper than the first. But here's the good news. We can't always avoid the first arrow, but we can learn to stop shooting the second one. This is where suffering becomes sacred, because when we see it clearly, it transforms from something we run from into something that leads us deeper into ourselves, into a wisdom we didn't know we had, into a kind of clarity that can't be found in comfort. Think of every truly powerful person you admire, not because of their money or looks, but because of their depth, their calm, their wisdom. Almost every one of them has suffered. And not just suffered, but grown through it. That's not an accident, that's the path. Because suffering humbles us. It strips away the noise and leaves us raw. And in that rawness, the ego cracks. That part of us that wants to always be right, to always be strong, to never need help. that part weakens, and in its place something softer appears, something more honest. That's where compassion comes from. That's where real strength begins. So many people believe they have to hide their pain, or pretend to be okay, or rush to fix themselves. But what if you didn't have to? What if your suffering isn't something broken in you, but something opening? It opens your heart to the suffering of others. It opens your mind to what really matters. It opens your path to deeper truth. And once you've walked through suffering with awareness, you'll find that nothing can shake you the same way again. You'll still feel, but you won't fear your feelings. You'll still fall, but you'll know how to rise, not by force, but by wisdom. The first noble truth tells us that dukkha exists. It's here. But the second noble truth tells us where it comes from: attachment, craving, clinging. And the third truth tells us that it can end. The fourth gives us the path. So suffering isn't the whole story. It's the start of the story. It's the opening scene, not the final act. But if we never look at it, we never move forward. This is why the Buddha didn't offer quick fixes or magic answers. He offered a path, a way to walk through the fire, not to get burned, but to come out clearer, lighter, stronger. That path begins with accepting dukkha as the doorway, not the obstacle, the entry point, the signpost that says, right here, this is where your real journey begins. And when you can look at suffering and say, I see you, I don't like you, but I'm willing to learn from you, something shifts. Suddenly, the pain becomes less personal, less like an attack, more like a message, a deep, ancient message saying, wake up. That's the voice behind every heartbreak, every failure, every loss. And not to destroy you, but to pull you into truth, to bring you closer to the real you. Not the you shaped by the world, but the one beneath all that, the one who can sit in silence and not feel lost, the one who can feel pain and still know peace is possible. Because peace isn't the absence of suffering, it's the presence of understanding. And understanding begins when we let suffering teach us what comfort never could. So, as you lie in the quiet tonight, maybe still feeling the ache of your own story, know this: you're not alone, you're not broken, you're not weak, you're simply human, and you're waking up. That's what dukkha is for. When you begin to see suffering not as a failure, but as the beginning of something deeper, something shifts inside you. You stop asking, why me? And start leaning into a more powerful question: what now? That's where transformation really starts. Not when we fix what's broken, but when we begin to look at the brokenness itself with new eyes. The kind of eyes that don't flinch at cracks, but see the hidden gold in them. Some wounds never fully close. Some mistakes leave marks that don't fade with time. But maybe they're not meant to. Maybe they're meant to shine. The Buddhist view of karma helps us understand that our actions, intentions, and responses are constantly shaping our life. Not as punishment or reward, but as a reflection. Life gives back what we offer it, not always in the way we expect, but always in a way that carries meaning. Just like a bowl cracked and mended with gold, we are shaped not by staying untouched, but by how we heal. In Japanese art, there is an ancient practice called kintsugi. When a bowl breaks, instead of hiding the cracks, they fill them with gold. The flaw becomes the feature. The break becomes the beauty. And the item becomes more valuable, not despite its history, but because of it. That's not just art. It's a mirror of karma itself. Karma doesn't mean everything is predetermined. It doesn't mean every painful thing that happens is something you deserved. What it does mean is that the way you respond to life's cracks determines whether they stay as open wounds or become golden seams. Karma is not fate. It's process. It's the law of cause and effect. But what most people miss is that karma is not just about the past. It's also about the future you're creating in every moment, especially in how you deal with pain. Let's say your life has broken open through heartbreak, illness, loss, failure. It's tempting to wish it never happened, to try and go back to how things were before. But what if there is no before worth returning to? What if the breaking was necessary for a new kind of strength to emerge? The teachings of karma ask us to look closely at what's happening within us, not to find blame, but to find clarity. If every moment holds the seed of a result, then the way we carry our wounds matters just as much as the wound itself. Are we holding it with bitterness, or are we using it as a chance to become more aware, more patient, more open? Every moment of pain is a chance to plant something new. That's the gift hidden in the discomfort. Most people don't see it because they're rushing to fix the pain or bury it. But the truth is, healing begins not when we push the pain away, but when we let it speak, and then choose what kind of energy we bring to it. A person who has suffered deeply can become either bitter or wise. The difference is not the event, it's how they meet it. Karma is shaped by intention, not just what you do, but the heart behind it. That's why two people can go through similar pain and come out with completely different energies. One becomes softer, kinder, deeper. The other becomes hard, guarded, angry. Karma flows in the direction of your response. And that's where kintsugi comes in. It's not about pretending the damage never happened. It's about honoring it. It's about saying, "This happened, I broke, but I didn't stay broken." You take your time. You mend carefully. And when the cracks begin to shine, it's not because you erased them. It's because you found the strength to live through them with grace. Most people misunderstand karma as some cosmic scorecard. But it's more intimate than that. It's the way your mind, your choices, your habits all come together to shape who you become. And pain, especially deep pain, reveals who we are under pressure. It uncovers the unconscious parts of us, the fears we've hidden, the beliefs we've never questioned. That's where the real work happens. You don't need to be perfect to live with good karma. You need to be conscious. You need to respond with care. You need to treat your suffering as a teacher, not an enemy. Because karma is built not just on what you do, but on the spirit in which you do it. You can do the right thing with the wrong energy and still feel empty. But when you act from a place of sincerity, even if it's small, it ripples. That's the gold being poured into the crack. One of the most powerful lessons from the Buddha's life is that he did not become awakened by avoiding suffering. He walked directly into it. He sat under the Bodhi tree and refused to run from discomfort. And from that, wisdom emerged. That's not just his story. It's a map for all of us. You will break. You may already feel broken, but that doesn't mean you're ruined. It means you're real. It means you're alive. And it means you now have the chance to craft something new, not just put the pieces back together, but to do it with intention. We don't choose all our suffering, but we do choose the story we build around it. We choose whether to let it shrink us or reshape us. And if we see the crack as a curse, we hide it. We bury it. We spend years trying to convince the world we're still whole. But when we see the crack as part of the design, as part of the path, we stop hiding. We slow down. We begin to live in a different way. Maybe your biggest heartbreak was the start of your spiritual path. Maybe your illness brought you closer to presence. Maybe your failure forced you to let go of the image you clung to and made space for something more honest to grow. These aren't accidents. These are karmic invitations. It doesn't mean we glorify pain. It means we stop wasting it. We let it mature us. We let it teach us about what really matters. And then we pour gold into it, not through perfection, but through awareness. Karma is not only shaped by what happens to you, but by what you become as a result of it. The broken bowl doesn't become art until someone takes the time to mend it with care. That's your role. You are both the broken bowl and the artist holding the gold. This also teaches us something else, that pain gives you the chance to grow not just for yourself, but for others. Every time you meet suffering with awareness, you develop compassion. And every act of compassion ripples outward. That's karma too. Your healing becomes someone else's light. Your story becomes someone else's hope. In Buddhism, this is why the Bodhisattva path is so honored, not just awakening for oneself, but using one's own suffering as a bridge to help others. The cracks become connection points. They become places where your experience becomes wisdom, and that wisdom becomes service. That's karma turning into something radiant. You won't always see the results right away. Karma doesn't work on your schedule. But every thought, every breath, every small act of turning toward growth adds to the pattern. The cracks begin to shine long before anyone else notices. But you will feel it. You'll begin to feel a strength that doesn't come from armor, but from honesty. A peace that doesn't come from control, but from surrender. That's the real beauty of karma. It's not just about what happens in the next life. It's about what happens in the next moment. Will you choose to harden or soften? Will you numb or feel? Will you rush to cover the crack or patiently fill it with gold? This is the art of healing. Not quick fixes, not pretending it didn't happen, but returning to your broken parts with care, with warmth, with presence, and trusting that in time those very wounds will shine. And when they do, you'll see that the life you were trying to get back to was never meant to be returned to. Because something more honest has begun, something more golden, not perfect, but real. And in the end, that's what shines the brightest. When we begin to honor our cracks, when we see that the places we once wanted to hide can be the very sources of light, something within us opens. We no longer chase perfection. We stop pretending we're untouched by life. Instead, we begin to walk forward with more awareness, with gentler eyes and steadier hands. But now that we've learned how to work with pain and karma, a deeper question arises. Why do we suffer in the first place? What pulls us into the same cycles, the same traps, again and again? The answer isn't always what we expect. It's not just pain itself. It's what we crave. It's what we refuse to let go of. It's what we think we need to be whole. This is where we meet tanha, the Buddhist word for craving, thirst, longing. At first, the word might seem simple. Everyone wants something, right? A better job, more love, peace of mind, freedom from anxiety. Wanting is normal. But in the Buddhist teachings, tanha isn't just desire. It's the kind of wanting that binds us, the kind that builds prisons inside us without us even knowing. Tanha reveals itself quietly. It can wear many masks: ambition, romance, achievement, even spiritual progress. But underneath it all is the same pull. If I can just get this, then I'll be happy. But that moment of having is always followed by the fear of losing, or worse, by the disappointment that it didn't fix what we thought it would. And so, the cycle begins again. Understanding tanha isn't about judging ourselves for wanting. It's about looking closely at what that wanting says about us. It's not always the desire that causes the suffering. It's the clinging to the desire. The belief that we cannot be okay until we have it. And more deeply, it's the belief that we are not enough as we are. This is why craving is not just a cause of suffering, but a mirror. It shows us exactly where we feel empty, where we believe something is missing. And often, those cravings point to something we haven't fully seen in ourselves. Not because we're broken, but because we're human. Because somewhere along the way, we were taught that our worth had to be earned. Tanha shows up in small ways, like restlessness when things are too quiet, or frustration when someone doesn't meet our expectations. It also shows up in deeper habits, like staying in relationships that drain us because we fear being alone, or chasing constant approval because we never learned how to approve of ourselves. When we track these cravings to their root, we begin to see what we're really holding on to. Sometimes it's an image of who we think we should be. Sometimes it's a story about what life owes us. Sometimes it's just the hope that something, anything, will finally make us feel at peace. The key is not to fight the craving, but to study it. Craving is a compass. It points directly to the places in ourselves we don't trust yet, where we haven't yet made peace. If we're always reaching for control, maybe it points to a deeper fear of chaos. If we're always longing for attention, maybe it reflects a wound from being unseen. Each craving carries a message. The question is whether we're willing to listen. When we sit with tanha instead of obeying it, we create space. And in that space, something powerful happens. We begin to ask, is this craving true? Will this thing really give me what I need? Or am I trying to fill a deeper hole with the wrong kind of answer? That's the beginning of wisdom. Not rejection of desire, but clear seeing. This doesn't mean you have to live without wanting anything. Desire can also be beautiful. It can guide us toward meaning, love, and service. But what makes the difference is awareness. When desire becomes attachment, it hardens, it becomes rigid, it stops flowing. And when we don't get what we crave, or when we do and it fades, we suffer. Not because life has failed us, but because we've placed our peace in something temporary. The Buddha taught that there are three kinds of craving: craving for pleasure, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. Each one hides a deep message. The craving for pleasure tells us we want to escape discomfort. The craving for existence shows we're afraid to be nobody. The craving for non-existence reveals our desire to end pain by ending awareness itself. All three point to the same misunderstanding, that peace lies outside of us. When you begin to look at your life through the lens of craving, things become clearer. That moment of irritation with someone, is it really about them? Or is it a craving for control, for recognition, for being seen in a certain way? That feeling of emptiness after success. Maybe it's not failure, but the realization that the craving you thought would satisfy you only led to more craving. And that's not your fault. It's how the mind works when it's not seen clearly. Tanha is sticky. It grabs, it holds, it promises. But when you meet it with presence, it begins to soften. And this is where mindfulness becomes essential. Because mindfulness doesn't just help you see your thoughts, it helps you feel your cravings without needing to follow them. It's the space between wanting and doing, and in that space is freedom. Every time you pause before acting on a craving, you weaken its grip. You begin to reclaim your power from it. You say, "I see you, I hear your voice, but I don't have to believe your story." And then you can choose. That's liberation, not the absence of desire, but the absence of being controlled by it. This is also where compassion becomes important. When you look at your cravings, don't look with shame. Look with tenderness, because every craving, at its root, is a younger part of you reaching out for comfort, safety, love. It's trying to protect you in the only way it knows how. The more you understand that, the more gently you can meet it. And the more gently you meet it, the more it transforms. You may find, over time, that the craving dissolves, not because you fought it, but because you gave it what it truly needed: attention. Not distraction, not indulgence, not suppression. Just clear, warm attention. And as the grip of craving loosens, what emerges is not emptiness, but a different kind of desire. A cleaner one, a desire to grow, to be of service, to love deeply without needing to possess. A desire not rooted in lack, but in wholeness. That's the shift. From craving to intention, from grasping to offering. This is how tanha becomes a compass. Not one that pulls you blindly, but one that teaches you. Shows you where you're still building your house on sand. Shows you what you've mistaken for truth. And in doing so, it helps you rebuild on rock. On something steady, something unshakable. The deeper your awareness grows, the more clearly you see the difference between fleeting craving and lasting purpose. One exhausts you, the other fuels you. One promises and disappoints, the other deepens and grounds. And the only way to tell the difference is by turning inward and watching. Not once, but again and again, because tanha doesn't disappear overnight. It arises again and again. That's not failure. That's the path. Each time it returns, it brings with it a new chance to understand yourself, a new chance to let go, a new chance to grow a little lighter, a little freer, a little more whole. And if you stay on this path with honesty, you'll begin to notice something unexpected. Peace doesn't come when all your cravings are fulfilled. Peace comes when your relationship to craving changes, when you can smile at it, thank it for what it taught you, and then let it pass. There is something powerful in knowing that the very thing that once caused your suffering can now point you to freedom. Tanha doesn't need to be your enemy. It can be your mirror, your guide, your silent teacher. Not because it's right, but because it shows you where to look deeper. And when you do, you'll find that the answers you were chasing in the outside world were always waiting quietly within you. Not in the next achievement, not in the next relationship, but right here, in this breath, in this moment, in this soft and steady choice to meet life without clinging. That's where the path turns. That's where freedom begins. When craving loosens its grip, a quiet clarity begins to form. You notice how much energy was spent chasing what never really brought lasting peace. You feel a shift, not dramatic, but undeniable. A new kind of space opens up within you, one where you can finally pause, breathe, and respond rather than react. And it's in that stillness that another question rises. If letting go frees us, what do we do with the pain that still remains? Letting go of craving doesn't erase the hurt. Even after insight, life still delivers its share of difficulty. Loss still cuts. Illness still arrives. Words still wound. So then, how do we live with the pain that we cannot avoid? How do we carry it without letting it close our hearts? In the Buddha's teaching, this question is answered through a powerful metaphor known as the parable of the arrow. It begins with a simple truth. Pain in life is unavoidable. This is the first arrow. It strikes when something goes wrong, an injury, a breakup, a loss, a betrayal. It hurts. It's raw. It's real. But then, almost immediately, something else happens. We react. We start to spin stories, blame ourselves, resist the pain, fear it, relive it. That's the second arrow. And while the first is part of life, the second is something we fire at ourselves. This second arrow is where most of our suffering lives. Not in the pain itself, but in the way we relate to it. It's the anger about being hurt, the shame about feeling weak, the fear that it will last forever. It's the mental loop that repeats the wound 1,000 times after the event has passed. And unlike the first arrow, which we often cannot control, the second one is something we can learn to stop. Understanding this changes everything, because now we're not helpless in our suffering. We have a choice. Pain arrives, but what we do next is where our power begins. When we bring awareness to the second arrow, we begin to see how much pain we create through resistance. We don't just feel sadness, we judge ourselves for feeling sad. We don't just feel fear, we label it as weakness. We don't just feel loss, we replay everything we could have done differently. This mental layering is where suffering multiplies. The practice, then, is to meet the first arrow with presence, not panic. To feel what's there, grief, anger, disappointment, but to hold it without the story that makes it worse. This isn't the same as numbing out. It's the opposite. It's staying with the pain, breathing with it, allowing it to move through the body without attaching more to it. This kind of awareness takes training. It's why meditation exists, not just as a relaxation technique, but as a way to build the muscle of attention. When we sit with whatever arises, without pushing or clinging, we start to see how thoughts come and go. We see how pain pulses in waves, not as a solid wall. We begin to notice that we don't have to become the pain. We can witness it gently, with space around it. That space is where transformation happens. When you can hold pain without adding to it, something else begins to rise. Clarity. You see more deeply into the nature of life. You realize that impermanence isn't just a concept, it's your direct experience. The moment of pain doesn't last. The sharpness softens. And even while it's still there, your relationship to it changes. It no longer defines you. It becomes part of your growth. Pain, when held with awareness, becomes a doorway to purpose. Not the kind of purpose that ignores hardship, but one that is shaped by it. You realize that your pain has taught you patience, that it has humbled you, that it has deepened your compassion, and these qualities, earned through presence, not avoidance, become the very tools that help you support others. This is where the personal becomes universal. When we stop shooting the second arrow, we begin to heal, and in that healing, we develop a strength that is quiet but unshakable. It's the kind of strength that allows you to sit with someone else's suffering, not to fix it, but to be with them in it. To hold space, because you've learned to hold it for yourself. Transforming pain into purpose doesn't mean you go searching for suffering. It means that when it comes, and it will, you meet it with a willingness to listen. What is this pain showing me? Where is it pointing? What illusion is it burning away? Sometimes the answer is simple. It's teaching you to slow down, to rest, to let go. Other times, it's deeper. It's revealing a truth you didn't want to face, or forcing you to release an identity that no longer fits. Either way, the pain becomes meaningful, not because you forced it to be, but because you stayed with it long enough to learn. One of the most powerful things about this teaching is that it puts the tools back in your hands. It doesn't tell you that you'll never hurt again. It doesn't promise constant happiness. But it does promise that with awareness, you won't be overwhelmed by your pain. You won't drown in it. You'll learn how to hold it, to learn from it, and eventually to rise from it. This is where mindfulness and compassion meet. Because the more you understand your own second arrows, the less you shoot them at others. You begin to see that everyone is carrying something. Everyone is reacting to some old wound, some fresh ache. And instead of adding judgment or impatience, you start to offer space. You become more gentle, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. This shift changes how we show up in the world. Instead of reacting from pain, we begin to respond from presence. Instead of adding to the noise, we offer calm. And slowly, this becomes not just a personal practice, but a way of living. You begin to carry your experiences differently. You stop seeing yourself as someone who was broken by life, and instead as someone shaped by it, honed, refined, deepened. Not perfect, not without scars, but awake, open, steady. In this light, the second arrow isn't just something to avoid, it's a signal to come back to presence. Every time you notice yourself spiraling, catastrophizing, blaming, shaming, that's a sign. That's your opportunity, not to suppress the pain, but to come back to the first arrow and meet it with truth. Because the first arrow holds the lesson, the second hides it. The more clearly you can feel the difference, the more free you become. Not because life has stopped hurting, but because you've stopped believing the mind's fearful story about the hurt. You've stepped into a larger awareness, one that can feel deeply and still remain grounded. This groundedness is what transforms pain into purpose. It's not a grand mission or a perfect outcome. It's the quiet decision to stay present, to keep showing up, to keep walking even when the road feels hard, and to know that every step you take in awareness is a step out of suffering and into truth. Over time, the wounds you've carried become part of your wisdom. You no longer see them as marks of failure. You see them as reminders. They show you how far you've come. They remind you that even in your darkest moments, something within you remained, something steady, something alive. And that's your purpose. Not something you have to invent or chase, but something that grows naturally from meeting life as it is, from turning toward your pain instead of away from it, from allowing it to shape you, soften you, awaken you. This is what the Buddha offered, not an escape, but a path that begins with suffering but does not end there, a path that leads through awareness, through compassion, and into a life of deeper meaning. So the next time pain arrives, don't rush to escape it. Pause, breathe, feel, and listen. The first arrow may still hurt, but you don't need to fire the second. You've learned another way. When pain is met with presence, it stops being something we run from and becomes something we learn from. In that shift, a new kind of strength is born, one that isn't about being untouched by life, but about being able to stay open through it. The more we understand our own suffering, the more we begin to recognize it in others, not just as a distant idea, but as a shared experience. You begin to notice the weight behind someone's eyes, the pause in their voice, the quiet grief sitting beneath a smile. And something within you stirs, not pity, but a wish to help. A desire not just to heal yourself, but to ease the pain around you. This is where personal transformation begins to expand beyond the self. The path that started with your own wounds becomes a bridge into the lives of others. This bridge is not built with grand gestures or perfect words. It's built with attention, empathy, and the sincere willingness to walk beside another through their suffering. In Buddhism, this is the heart of the Bodhisattva vow, a promise to keep showing up for others, even as you continue your own work of awakening. A bodhisattva is not a distant ideal or a mythical figure. It is anyone who chooses to turn their own growth into service. Not because they've reached the end of the path, but because they understand that we do not walk it alone. The bodhisattva sees suffering not only as something to overcome, but as a doorway into compassion. And through that compassion, pain is transformed. This vow to serve others is not a burden. It is a kind of freedom, because when you stop focusing only on your own pain and begin to hold space for the pain of others, your own suffering softens, not because it disappears, but because it no longer isolates you. It becomes part of a shared human experience, a common language, and in that space of shared understanding, you find meaning. The bodhisattva doesn't wait until they feel perfect. They begin right where they are, with their confusion, their fear, their heartbreak. These become tools for connection. Every scar becomes a point of empathy. Every lesson becomes something that can help someone else. This is the alchemy of suffering. It turns personal pain into collective healing. And this transformation isn't loud or dramatic. It can be as simple as listening without judgment, holding someone's hand without offering advice, staying present when everything in you wants to retreat. These are acts of service that arise from deep inner work. They don't fix the world, but they shift the energy around you, and sometimes that's all someone needs, to feel less alone. The Bodhisattva vow reminds us that awakening isn't only personal. The goal isn't just your peace, but the peace of all beings. This is what makes the path deeper, fuller. When your actions become rooted in this wider vision, even small choices become powerful. The way you speak, the way you move through the world, the way you respond to others, it all becomes part of your practice. This doesn't mean ignoring your needs or bypassing your own healing. It means recognizing that in healing yourself, you create the capacity to hold more for others. That the work you do on your own heart is not separate from the work you offer the world. The more you understand your own patterns, your own pain, the more clearly you can meet others without fear or judgment. And this doesn't require you to be a teacher or a leader. It simply asks you to stay open, to let your compassion extend beyond your personal story, to act with kindness even when no one is watching, to choose presence when it would be easier to turn away. True compassion isn't about fixing, it's about being with. It's about meeting others where they are and saying, without words, I see you, I feel this too, you're not alone. That moment of connection can be more healing than any solution. It reminds both of you that something deeper holds you, something beyond the story, beyond the pain. This is not an easy path. It asks for patience, humility, and a willingness to feel deeply. It will stretch your heart. It will test your resolve. But in return, it offers a kind of richness that nothing else can. A life that is not only full, but meaningful. A life that knows its strength, not by how much it has avoided pain, but by how gently it holds the pain of others. And here's the paradox. The more you give in this way, the more you are given. Compassion is not a limited resource. It grows through use. Every act of care strengthens it. Every moment of presence deepens it. And over time, you begin to feel less afraid of suffering, not because it's gone, but because it no longer separates you from life. It connects you to it. This connection is what heals, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. You stop seeing yourself as separate from others. You start to recognize that every being, in their own way, is carrying something. That behind every action, pleasant or unpleasant, is a history, a hurt, a hope. This vision softens your judgments. It turns irritation into curiosity, distance into closeness. When you live with this kind of awareness, your presence becomes medicine, not flashy, not dramatic, but steady, quiet, trustworthy. People begin to feel safe around you, not because you have answers, but because you have space. You become a refuge, not by removing pain, but by staying close to it without fear. The Bodhisattva vow invites us to live like this, to not turn away, to not close down, to stay rooted in our own practice while extending our heart outward. It's a vow that is renewed again and again, not once, not in words alone, but in every choice to love when it would be easier to judge, to show up when it would be easier to hide. And while this path can feel heavy at times, it is also deeply joyful, because nothing brings more peace than knowing your life matters, not in a grand sense, but in the quiet ways that you touch others, a smile, a kind word, a patient pause. These things matter. They ripple. They stay. As you walk this path, you will discover that your own healing is no longer separate from the healing of the world. That when you comfort a friend, you also comfort something in yourself. That when you forgive someone else, a part of your own heart softens. This is the web of interbeing. This is the depth of the Bodhisattva path. And it doesn't end. The vow is infinite, not because it can be completed, but because love has no finish line. Each act of compassion leads to another. Each moment of connection builds a bridge, and slowly suffering becomes not just something to survive, but something that teaches you how to serve. In this way, your life becomes the vow, your breath becomes the offering, your presence becomes the teaching. And the world, still full of suffering, begins to shift. Not because pain is gone, but because someone, somewhere, is willing to hold it with love. Compassion strengthens us, but the work of holding pain for ourselves and others eventually brings us face to face with something far more subtle, more difficult to name. Not external suffering, but the internal forces that quietly sabotage our path. After we commit to awakening, something strange often happens. Resistance grows louder, doubt appears, anger flares up, old habits return. Even when our intentions are clear, a shadow rises. This is where many turn back. But what if this resistance isn't the end of the road? What if it's the doorway to deeper truth? In the Buddhist tradition, this shadow has a name, Mara. He is not just a myth or a symbol of evil. He is every internal force that tries to pull us away from awareness. Mara is desire that whispers empty promises. Mara is fear dressed as caution. He is the voice of, "You're not good enough. This is pointless. Why bother?" But Mara is also something else, a teacher. One we usually don't want, but one we deeply need. The Buddha's final confrontation with Mara happened not through battle, but through presence. As the story goes, Mara approached the Buddha repeatedly through temptation, fear, distraction, and pride. Each time, the Buddha responded not with violence or escape, but with calm recognition. "I see you, Mara." These words are not rejection, they are clarity. That is the key to transforming Mara, from enemy into mentor. Mara appears most often when we are close to real change. Right before insight, fear creeps in. Right after compassion, anger resurfaces. This is not failure, it is the nature of the path. When you start to clear away confusion, the parts of you that relied on that confusion resist. They feel threatened. Mara comes as a protector of the false self, the part of us built on old stories and survival strategies. So when he appears, it is not a sign to stop, but a sign that something important is being revealed. Meeting Mara requires honesty. Not the kind that performs, but the kind that quietly admits, "This is hard. I want to run. I want to give up. I want to numb out." Naming what arises doesn't make it stronger, it makes you stronger. Because what is named can be worked with. What is hidden controls you. What is seen can be understood. This is why meditation is such a powerful tool in working with inner demons. When you sit and watch your mind without judgment, Mara shows up. Doubt may whisper that you're wasting your time. Restlessness may try to convince you to check your phone, your email, anything but stay. Boredom may dull your senses. Each of these is a form of Mara. Each one is a test, not of your willpower, but of your clarity. When you don't run, when you sit and stay with what arises, you begin to notice patterns. You see that Mara's voice is repetitive. It follows familiar scripts. It uses the same tricks again and again. But now you're watching. You're no longer inside the reaction. You are observing it. And in that moment, the power begins to shift. Mara cannot survive the light of attention. Sometimes Mara shows up not as thought, but as feeling, a deep unease, a tightness in the chest, a wave of shame or regret. These are not distractions from the path. They are the path. Because inside every uncomfortable feeling is a lesson, an old story ready to be questioned, a wound ready to be met, a habit ready to be released. What transforms Mara into a teacher is our willingness to stay, to listen, to learn. When you say, "I see you, Mara," you are not just naming fear, you are stepping into wisdom. You are practicing what the Buddha modeled under the Bodhi tree, equanimity in the face of disturbance. This practice is not about perfection. Mara doesn't disappear after one confrontation. He returns, again and again. But each time he does, your relationship with him changes. At first, he feels like a threat. Later, he becomes familiar. Eventually, he becomes a guide. His presence tells you where your work still lies. For example, if Mara appears as self-doubt every time you move toward your calling, maybe he is pointing to a deeper fear of visibility, a fear of being seen and judged. That fear is not the enemy. It is the doorway. Walk through it, and you find greater freedom on the other side. If Mara shows up as irritation in your relationships, perhaps he is revealing a hidden need for control, a part of you that struggles when others don't act the way you want them to. Again, this isn't shameful. It's a signal. The practice is to notice, to reflect, and to ask, what is this really about? Each time you meet Mara with this kind of attention, you gain insight, not abstract ideas, but real-life understanding. You see how suffering is maintained not by events, but by reactions. You realize that what you called my personality may actually be a set of old strategies, and you begin to feel the spaciousness that comes when those strategies loosen. This is spiritual maturity, not the absence of struggle, but the capacity to face struggle with openness. To use everything, even resistance, as fuel for growth. To welcome the uncomfortable parts of your psyche as invitations to go deeper. In time, Mara stops feeling like an enemy and starts to feel like a mirror. He shows you your unfinished work. He reflects the parts of yourself you've avoided, and in doing so, he sharpens your awareness. Every time you turn toward him, you cultivate courage, and that courage becomes your foundation. This kind of inner strength is not loud, It's quiet. It's the strength of sitting with discomfort without needing to fix it. The strength of telling the truth to yourself. The strength of choosing presence when escape would be easier. And as you grow in this way, you stop fearing Mara's return. You stop hoping for a life without disturbance. Instead, you begin to trust yourself to meet whatever arises. This is the turning point. When your path is no longer about avoiding difficulty, but about learning from it. When the demons you feared become the teachers you bow to. There's a strange kind of peace that comes from this. Not because life becomes easy, but because you are no longer at war with your own mind. You no longer need everything to go perfectly in order to feel okay. You no longer see inner chaos as a personal failure, but as part of the work. And from that peace, new qualities emerge. Patience, because you've seen how long real transformation takes. Humility, because you know how many times you've fallen and gotten up. Compassion, because you understand what it takes to face yourself. These are the gifts Mara leaves behind when he departs. Not scars, but strengths. Not shame, but understanding. Every visit becomes a teaching. Every teaching becomes a layer of wisdom, and that wisdom becomes your guide. So the next time resistance rises, or fear whispers, or self-doubt knocks, pause. Listen. Don't turn away. Don't believe the voice blindly, but don't fight it either. Just say, "I see you, Mara." And then sit down with him. Watch him carefully. Let him speak. And then ask him what he's here to teach you. Because hidden in every disturbance is a thread of insight. A path you haven't walked yet. A truth waiting to be seen. And the ones who walk this path fully, with eyes wide open, know that even the darkest voices can lead to the brightest light, if you know how to listen. When Mara leaves, he doesn't take the fire with him. He only reveals where it's burning brightest. The internal battles might pause, but the deeper truth remains. The mind still clings. Even after the storm of fear passes, there's still the daily trance we fall into. The belief that comfort will last, that life can be controlled, that this moment isn't enough unless it looks exactly as we want. And yet, just beneath the surface of this chase is an uncomfortable truth. Something about life still feels unstable, unsatisfying, uncertain. This is the illusion Mara distracts us from. But there's another teaching that pulls back the veil even more clearly. The burning house. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha offers a striking parable. A father sees his children playing inside a house that has caught fire. They're so absorbed in their games that they don't notice the danger. He calls out to them, warns them, pleads with them, but they don't listen. They're too distracted by their toys. So the father uses a skillful means. He tells them that there are even better toys outside. Curious and excited, the children run out and are saved. This story is not about literal fire or literal toys. It's a metaphor for samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death, craving and clinging, pleasure and pain. The house is our ordinary life, filled with attachments and habits that keep us distracted. The fire is suffering, already burning the structure we cling to. The children are all of us, absorbed in our temporary pleasures, too caught up in our personal dramas to see that the ground beneath us is unstable. The first time this teaching is heard, it can sound harsh. Why call life a burning house? Why describe joy, love, and beauty as distractions? But the Buddha's point isn't that life has no beauty. It's that beauty is fragile when it's attached to illusion. The problem isn't pleasure itself. It's our refusal to see that even joy arises and passes. That nothing, not even the things we cherish, are outside the law of impermanence. The fire in the house is not sent to punish us. It is a wake-up call. Suffering burns through what is false. It reveals the layers of clinging we thought were part of our identity. When something we depend on is taken away, a job, a relationship, health, what's really lost isn't just the thing itself, but the illusion of control. The fire exposes that illusion, and in the heat of that moment, something deeper can be seen. Many people don't realize they're in the burning house until everything they clung to starts falling apart. That's when questions begin to arise. Why does nothing feel lasting? Why am I always chasing the next thing? Why does comfort not satisfy me for long? These aren't signs of failure, they are signs of awakening. In Buddhist practice, they're the first cracks in the trance of samsara. Samsara doesn't mean the world is bad. It means the world, when misunderstood, becomes a trap. When we seek permanence in impermanent things, we suffer. When we demand stability from what is always changing, we are disappointed. This is not because life has betrayed us, but because we asked it to be what it cannot be. The children in the burning house aren't wrong for playing, they're just unaware. The father doesn't punish them, he uses wisdom, he speaks their language. This is what the Buddha called upaya, or skillful means. He meets people where they are, not where they should be. And then he shows them a way out, not by shame or force, but by redirecting their attention. In this story, the Buddha isn't asking us to reject the world. He's asking us to see it clearly, to see the games we play, the comforts we chase, and ask, is this really freedom, or is it just distraction dressed up as fulfillment? Waking up from samsara doesn't mean leaving the world. It means moving through the world with awareness. It means understanding that everything we love is temporary, not to make us fearful, but to make us present. The moment becomes more sacred, not less, when we stop clinging to it. Suffering, when seen through this lens, becomes the turning point. It stops being a curse and becomes a kind of wisdom. It burns away the ideas we thought would save us. It shows us that no relationship, no possession, no status can hold us forever. And in that seeing, something quieter, more stable, begins to grow, a kind of inner stillness that doesn't depend on circumstances. This stillness isn't apathy. It's intimacy with reality. It's the ability to be fully in life without being fooled by its illusions. When you understand that the house is burning, you don't stop loving. You just stop building your identity on what's already turning to ash. And from that clarity, a different kind of compassion emerges. You see others still inside the house, still distracted by the next goal, the next escape, the next comfort. You don't judge them. You remember being them. You know how convincing the dream can be. But now you see the fire and you want to help them see it too. Not to take away their joy, but to show them a deeper joy. One not built on craving, but on freedom. This freedom is not outside of life. It is in how you relate to life. When you stop grasping, life softens. When you let go of control, the moment opens, and the fire that once threatened to destroy you becomes the very thing that burned away your chains. The Burning House Sutra doesn't ask you to be cold or detached. It asks you to be brave enough to see the truth, to understand that clinging to what cannot last only deepens your pain, and to know that freedom doesn't come from what you hold, but from how you hold it. This clarity is not philosophical, it's lived. It's felt in how you sit with discomfort, how you speak to others, how you respond when things don't go your way. It's not about having no preferences. It's about not being owned by them. It's about knowing that joy is real, but it's not the goal. The goal is liberation. Joy arises along the way, but it is not the foundation. The foundation is wisdom, the kind of wisdom that sees clearly, acts compassionately, and stays awake even when it would be easier to sleep. This is the path out of the burning house, not through escape, but through awakening. So the next time suffering touches your life, ask yourself, not just, how do I stop this? But, what is this revealing? What illusion is being burned away? What truth is asking to be seen? The fire is not here to punish, it is here to reveal. And if you stay with it, without turning away, it will show you the way out. Not out of life, but out of confusion, out of grasping, into freedom. This is the promise of the path. Not that life will stop burning, but that you will stop mistaking the fire for your home. Seeing through the burning illusions of samsara is not the end of the path. It is the clearing of ground. Once the flames reveal that what we clung to cannot hold, a deeper truth waits in the ashes. It is not a truth of despair, but one of freedom. The fire doesn't just take away what is false, it exposes that the self we thought was suffering is not as solid as it once seemed. What if the suffering you feel is not just about what's happening, but about who you think you are in the middle of it? This is where the teaching of shunyata, or emptiness, becomes essential. Not emptiness as cold or meaningless, but emptiness as spaciousness, as possibility. In Buddhism, to say something is empty is not to say it doesn't exist. It's to say it doesn't exist independently, permanently, or in isolation. Everything is empty of fixed essence. Everything arises through causes and conditions, and that includes the self. When suffering takes hold, it feels personal. It feels like I am suffering, I am broken, I am stuck. The I feels real, and the pain becomes a story that wraps tightly around it. But when you begin to observe the self with clarity, something surprising happens. That I begins to dissolve, not into nothing, but into something more fluid. You begin to see that the suffering self is not a permanent identity. It is a construction, one built from memory, from emotion, from thought. And when those elements shift, so does the self. This doesn't mean your experience isn't real. It means that the one experiencing it isn't fixed. You are not the same person from moment to moment. Your reactions, your beliefs, even your sense of being wounded, they all shift depending on conditions. The pain is real, but the person who hurts is not as solid as you assume. Emptiness reveals that the self is a process, not a possession. It is dynamic, not static. This understanding doesn't erase you, it liberates you. Because the suffering self depends on a story. This is who I am. This is what happened to me. This is what it means. But when you look closely, those stories unravel. The mind repeats them, but they are not absolute truths. They are interpretations, patterns, mental habits. The power of shunyata is that it invites you to question not just your pain, but the foundation it rests on. Who is suffering? Is it the same you from yesterday, or from childhood, or from 5 minutes ago? When you meditate deeply, you can observe how even your identity flickers. Thoughts arise and pass. Emotions come and go. Body sensations shift. The sense of I moves with them. It's not one thing. It's a collection of things, moving. Seeing this clearly brings a kind of relief. Because now, when suffering arises, you can meet it with space. You can say, "This is pain, but it is not mine in the way I thought. It is part of the conditions arising now, and it, too, will change." You stop clinging to the identity of the sufferer. You stop turning temporary feelings into permanent definitions. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you wise. It gives you the ability to respond without being trapped. You no longer have to defend the wounded self, prove it, justify it, or protect it. You can let it soften. And in that softening, something larger can be felt, a kind of awareness that holds the suffering without becoming it. This awareness is what remains when the self relaxes. It's not a thing. It's not a new identity. It's more like open space, clear, calm, spacious. It doesn't fix pain, it surrounds it. And in that surrounding, the pain begins to lose its tight grip. One of the core teachings related to emptiness is the absence of inherent existence. Everything exists in relation to something else. A thought needs a thinker. A pain needs a body. A feeling needs context. But none of these parts are permanent. They are dependent. They are conditioned. And that means they are free to change. When you apply this to your suffering, you begin to notice that your pain is not a solid object. It is an unfolding, an energy, a process. And processes are not personal. They are part of life, just like waves are part of the ocean, but not the ocean itself. This view transforms the way you relate to difficulty. Instead of taking it as a personal failure, you see it as a temporary convergence of conditions. This isn't detachment in the cold sense. It's clarity in the warm sense. You still care, you still feel, but you don't collapse into it. The identity of the wounded one is especially sticky. It clings through stories, through memory, through the need to make sense of pain. But when you begin to see that even this identity is empty, you stop being trapped by your past. You realize that even deep pain does not define you. It visits you, it shapes you, but it does not own you. Emptiness also opens the door to interconnection, because if the self is empty of fixed essence, then so is everyone else. And that means we are all flowing processes, bumping into each other, influencing each other. Your suffering isn't separate from others. Their pain isn't separate from yours. This is not poetic. It is direct reality. The more you see the emptiness of the self, the more you sense your connection to everything. And from that connection comes compassion, not as a duty, but as a natural response. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start wondering, "How can I meet this with wisdom?" Because you know it's not just about you. Your clarity helps others. Your presence ripples out. This is the real beauty of emptiness. It doesn't remove you from the world. It places you right at the heart of it, with less fear, less grasping, and more availability. You are not stuck in your identity. You are free to respond, free to change, free to grow. In practice, this means watching your mind with care, noticing when a strong feeling arises and asking, what story is this attached to? What part of me is clinging? Is this the whole truth, or just one passing view? You pause, you breathe, you soften your grip. Over time, the suffering doesn't go away completely, but its weight shifts. It becomes lighter. Not because the circumstances change, but because your sense of self has changed. You're not the same person holding it. You're not holding it in the same way. This is the liberation that shunyata offers. Not an escape from life, but a re-entry into life without the burden of a fixed self. You move more freely, speak more honestly, love more openly, because you're no longer protecting a permanent identity. You're living as a dynamic expression of awareness. And this expression, this moving self, doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real, present, willing to be shaped by life rather than trying to control it, willing to meet each moment without defending the past or fearing the future. In this space, even suffering becomes part of the dance. Not something to resist, but something to witness, to learn from, to move with. The pain doesn't define you. The identity doesn't trap you. The story doesn't freeze you. You are not the one who suffers. You are the space in which suffering arises and fades. Hold that truth gently. Let it settle. Let it move through you, not as a belief, but as an experience. And when it does, you may find that the freedom you've been seeking was never far. It was only hidden behind the illusion of solidity. Emptiness reveals the illusion. And in the absence of that illusion, suffering loses its deepest hook. Not because it disappears, but because the you who clung to it no longer feels the need to hold on. When the illusion of a fixed self begins to dissolve, what remains is not emptiness as absence, but emptiness as space, space that is alive, responsive, and deeply aware. In that openness, words often begin to lose their edge. Explanation feels too small, labels feel incomplete. The desire to speak, to wrap everything in meaning, starts to fall away. Something deeper is calling, not louder, but quieter. A kind of knowing that does not arise from thinking, but from listening. A listening so still, so present, that it becomes its own kind of truth. This is where silence enters, not as the absence of sound, but as the presence of depth. When we are wounded, our first instinct is often to speak, to explain, to vent, to analyze the pain into something we can control. And sometimes that helps. But eventually, there comes a moment when words no longer heal, they only circle. And when that moment comes, the most powerful act is not to say more, but to say nothing at all. Noble silence in the Buddhist tradition is not a refusal to speak. It is a commitment to listen more deeply, to what is beyond words, beyond stories, beyond the constructed self. It is an invitation to sit with suffering without interpreting it, without shaping it into a narrative, not because the pain doesn't matter, but because the mind's effort to explain it can sometimes trap it in place. When you sit in silence with suffering, the pain shifts. It no longer needs to perform. It no longer seeks an audience. It can simply be, and in being, it softens, not because it has been solved, but because it has been allowed, because it has been given space to breathe. This kind of silence does not come naturally. Most of us are taught that silence means disconnection or repression, that speaking is how we heal. And there is truth in that, up to a point. But healing is not only found in expression. Sometimes it waits in the quiet, in the spaces between words, in the stillness where nothing is pushed away or pulled closer, in the pause where we stop trying to fix and begin to simply feel. This feeling is not passive, it is full attention. It is sitting with the body and noticing how sorrow moves, noticing how it rises in the chest, how it pulses behind the eyes, how it contracts the belly, and doing nothing about it, not distracting, not numbing, not reacting, just staying. This is noble silence, the silence that says, I will not abandon you, even if I do not understand you. In this way, silence becomes companionship. It becomes presence without pressure. When we offer it to ourselves, we stop demanding quick answers. We begin to trust the wisdom of the body, of the breath, of the present moment. We begin to see that healing does not always arrive as clarity. Sometimes it arrives as peace. And when we extend noble silence to others, something even more profound happens. We stop trying to fix their pain with advice or reassurance. We stop filling the space with our own discomfort. We simply sit with them, quietly, without needing to change anything. That silence speaks louder than any words. It says, "You are safe here. You are seen. You are not alone." This is the silence of compassion, not empty, but deeply full, not cold, but warmly aware. It holds without gripping, it receives without judging, and it listens, not just with the ears, but with the heart. There are moments in meditation when this silence becomes tangible, when the thoughts settle, when the mind stops chasing, and what remains is just this breath, this heartbeat, this presence. In those moments, understanding arises, not from logic, but from direct contact. Insight that is felt, not thought. Truth that needs no explanation. Noble silence is not escape. It is the opposite of avoidance. It is turning fully toward experience and choosing to meet it without commentary, without interruption, without the mind's usual defense mechanisms. And in doing so, we discover that so much of our suffering was amplified by noise, by the inner dialogue, the self-criticism, the rehearsed explanations. In silence, those patterns become visible. You begin to hear how the mind tries to fill the space, how it narrates your emotions, spins theories, jumps to conclusions. But when you choose not to follow, not to add more, those patterns begin to fade. What remains is presence, and presence in its purest form is healing. Silence also teaches patience. In a world that values speed, productivity, and certainty, silence slows us down. It reminds us that growth is not linear, that clarity does not always come on demand, that sometimes the most important truths ripen in their own time, and our job is simply to wait, to stay open, to trust the unfolding. In this way, noble silence becomes a spiritual practice, a discipline of not reacting, a training in awareness. It shows us where we still cling, where we still resist, where we still demand that life fit our preferences. And it helps us release those demands gently, without force. The more we practice this kind of silence, the more we come to appreciate its richness. We begin to crave it, not as withdrawal, but as return. Return to the self beneath the stories. Return to the breath beneath the thinking. Return to the moment that holds everything without needing to explain any of it. And from this place, action becomes wiser. Words, when they do arise, are more intentional. Emotions, when they are felt, are less overwhelming, because the silence has given us space to see clearly, to feel fully, to choose consciously. In times of deep suffering, silence can be the most faithful companion. It does not promise to remove the pain, but it stays, it watches, it breathes. And in that stillness, something begins to heal, not because we understand it, but because we have allowed it. Allowing is the essence of noble silence. Not fixing, not analyzing, not escaping, just allowing. And in that allowing, we begin to hear the quiet wisdom that has always been there, beneath the words, beneath the noise, beneath the identity. This is not the silence of suppression. It is the silence of intimacy, the silence of being fully here. And when suffering is met with that kind of silence, it no longer needs to shout. It begins to settle. It begins to soften. It begins to speak, not in language, but in insight. The journey through pain is not always a path of answers. Sometimes it is a path of listening. And noble silence is the doorway. It leads us not away from suffering, but into the depth of it, with kindness, with patience, with stillness. And from that depth, something unshakable grows. That is the language of silence. It cannot be taught, only experienced. It does not shout, but it transforms. And in the quiet it offers, the heart learns how to heal, not through control, but through presence, not through knowing, but through being. Silence, when held with intention, becomes more than stillness. It becomes revelation. In those moments of quiet presence, the mind begins to show itself, not as a fixed thing, but as a stream of impressions constantly moving, reacting, searching, clinging. Within that stillness, something else emerges. A question that doesn't need to be asked aloud. What, exactly, is this experience we call suffering? It feels solid when we're caught in it. But what if it isn't? What if, underneath the surface of pain, there's a pattern waiting to be understood? This is where mindfulness moves from general awareness into something sharper and more precise. Vipassana, or insight meditation. It is not just about calming the mind. It is about seeing deeply into the nature of experience. While noble silence helps us make space for pain, Vipassana gives us the tools to observe that pain with clarity. Not to explain it, not to label it, but to dissect it, to break it down into its smallest parts and see how each part arises and fades. Vipassana works like an internal X-ray. It does not change the content of your life, but it reveals the structure underneath it. You begin to see that what you called suffering is not one thing, but many things. It is sensation, thought, reaction, memory, resistance, all layered and moving. And when you watch each part separately, the solid block of suffering starts to fall apart. This process begins with direct observation. You sit, you breathe, you pay attention, not to think about what's happening, but to feel it exactly as it is. If there's sadness, you observe the heaviness in the chest. If there's fear, you notice the tension in the gut. If there's anger, you feel the heat, the clenching. You don't interpret these things. You don't run from them. You just watch, moment by moment. As you stay with this observation, something surprising happens. The sensations begin to change. What seemed solid becomes fluid. What felt permanent begins to flicker. You start to understand one of the core teachings of the Buddha, not intellectually, but viscerally. Anicca, impermanence. Everything arises, everything passes, nothing stays. This realization is not philosophical. It's a lived experience. And in that experience, suffering loses some of its power. Not because it stops hurting, but because it no longer fools you into thinking it will last forever. The mind stops believing its own stories. And when the mind stops believing, the heart begins to rest. Another key insight that comes through Vipassana is the understanding of anatta, non-self. As you observe your suffering closely, you begin to see that it's not personal. Pain arises, but it is not your pain in the way the mind assumes. It is a conditioned experience, a result of causes, a passing formation. This helps you let go of the identity that clings to pain. You don't have to defend it. You don't have to own it. You just watch it come and go. Through this, compassion also grows, not as a reaction, but as a natural response. When you see your own suffering clearly, you see how universal it is. Everyone is dealing with the same shifting sensations, the same reactive thoughts, the same emotional turbulence. And because you've seen it in yourself, you can meet it in others with more patience, more understanding, more ease. The practice of Vipassana sharpens your awareness like a blade, but it also softens your heart. It cuts through illusion, but it does not harden you. It invites you to look at the ugliest thoughts, the deepest fears, the rawest emotions, and to hold them with equanimity, not with cold distance, but with grounded presence. This kind of presence is not fragile. It is trained, strengthened. You don't need to be fearless to do it. You only need to be willing to stay, willing to feel, willing to look. And with time, what once overwhelmed you begins to lose its grip. Not because you've pushed it away, but because you've seen it clearly enough that it no longer hides. One of the great misunderstandings about mindfulness is that it means being calm all the time. But true mindfulness, especially in Vipassana, is not about mood. It's about honesty. It's about meeting whatever arises, whether calm, chaos, sadness, boredom, desire, with equal attention. No preference, no judgment, just clarity. And in that clarity, transformation begins. Not dramatic or sudden, but steady. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to notice suffering earlier, before it becomes overwhelming. You begin to see patterns in your mind that were invisible before, like the habit of catastrophizing, or the reflex to avoid discomfort, or the loop of self-blame. As you observe these patterns without feeding them, they begin to weaken. Their fuel is unconsciousness. When you bring them into light, they lose momentum. What remains is awareness, and awareness is free. Vipassana also reveals the connection between the body and mind. You see how thoughts trigger sensations, how sensations trigger thoughts, how emotions move through both. This helps you untangle what feels like one big mess into smaller, workable pieces. It turns a storm into a series of drops, each one manageable, each one impermanent. This process doesn't require special conditions. You don't need to retreat to a cave or escape your responsibilities. Vipassana can be practiced anywhere, in traffic, in a conversation, while doing dishes. It is a way of living, not a special event. It asks only one thing: attention, full, present attention. The more you live this way, the more you see how often the mind exaggerates suffering, how it turns discomfort into identity, how it clings to what's gone and resists what's here. Vipassana reveals these habits, not to shame them, but to free you from them, to show you that suffering is not always what it seems. That much of it is optional. This does not mean pain goes away. It means you stop amplifying it. You stop layering it with fear, with projection, with resistance. You let it be what it is, and nothing more. And that simple act changes everything. Over time, your mind becomes more stable, your emotions more balanced, your relationships more honest. Not because you've controlled anything, but because you've seen everything more clearly. And that clarity, born of attention, becomes your guide. In the depths of this practice, insight arises. Not just insights about pain, but about life itself. You begin to see the nature of reality, not as a concept, but as a direct experience. You feel the constant change. You witness the absence of solid ground. And instead of fear, you feel freedom, because you no longer need things to be fixed. You can ride the waves, not drown in them. This freedom is not flashy. It's quiet. It's the freedom of knowing that you can be with anything, that no emotion is too big, that no thought is too dark, that no sensation is too intense. Because you have learned how to observe, how to stay, how to see. Vipassana is not a quick fix. It is a path, a lifelong process. But every moment you choose to pay attention is a step on that path. Every breath you watch, every feeling you allow, every thought you see and release, each one is a step toward liberation. Not from life, but into it. Because in the end, that is what mindfulness reveals. That the mind doesn't need to be fought. That pain doesn't need to be feared. That experience, even when difficult, is workable. And that awareness, simple, bare, present awareness, is the most powerful tool you have. It's always available, always waiting, just one breath away. And through it, even the deepest suffering can be seen clearly, understood deeply, met fully, and transformed completely. Even as clarity grows through deep observation and suffering is seen for what it truly is, impermanent, conditioned, and free of a fixed self, it does not mean that pain simply disappears. Even after the sharpest insights, we find ourselves caught again. Old habits resurface. Emotions we thought we'd outgrown return without warning, and confusion begins to whisper, "Shouldn't I be past this by now?" But this is not failure. This is the path unfolding in a shape far more honest than a straight line. It moves in curves, in spirals, in returns that carry depth rather than defeat. The cycle of samsara, this continuous round of craving, clinging, birth, and becoming, is not a prison because it repeats. It is a prison when we mistake repetition for stagnation. In truth, the spiral of suffering is not static. It loops, but it doesn't return to the same place. Each encounter with pain is not the same as the last. If awareness has grown, then what feels like relapse may actually be renewal from another angle. A deeper layer, a subtler thread now exposed to light. Growth does not mean we never feel overwhelmed again. It means that when we do, we see it more clearly. We recover more consciously. We ask better questions. We fall, but with more grace. This is not regression. This is maturity disguised as repetition. Samsara is often misunderstood as something outside of us, a world of chaos and distraction pulling us away from peace. But the wheel of samsara turns inside the mind. Each moment of clinging, each attempt to avoid pain, each grasp for what is fleeting, these are the movements that keep the cycle alive. And yet, every return is also an opportunity. Each time we circle back to an old wound or pattern, we arrive with more wisdom than before. That is the spiral's secret. What makes this spiral different from a simple loop is awareness. Without awareness, we walk in circles. With awareness, we begin to spiral upward. The outer experience might look the same, but internally, the terrain is shifting. The same anger doesn't hold the same power. The same fear doesn't last as long. The same reaction is noticed sooner. These are not small things. They are signs of movement, subtle but real. Spiritual growth is not about removing all suffering. It is about reducing its hold, about shortening its stay, about loosening the belief that it defines us. Sometimes going backward is exactly what reveals how far we've come. The pain returns, but the relationship to it is not the same. The spiral reminds us that forward movement often includes familiar ground. This understanding can bring enormous relief. It softens the judgment we place on ourselves when we repeat a mistake, when we react from old patterns, when we feel lost again. Instead of concluding, "I haven't changed," we begin to ask, "What am I seeing now that I couldn't before?" And in that question, something shifts. The Buddhist path doesn't promise an escape from samsara by bypassing the human experience. It offers a path through it, with eyes open, and that path winds. It doubles back. It dips before it rises. This is not a flaw in the design. It is how depth is created. A spiral moves closer to the center with each turn, and that center is not outside us. It is the quiet, undisturbed awareness that never changes, even as everything else does. This inner stillness is what we begin to trust, not as a concept, but as a felt experience. The more we spiral inward, the more we realize that we are not the storm. We are the space in which it passes. And so, even when the mind repeats its old songs, we are less tempted to dance to them. We can watch them come, watch them go, and remain rooted. This rooting is not dramatic. It's not made of big breakthroughs. It's made of small moments of remembering. Each time we pause before reacting, each time we breathe through discomfort, each time we forgive ourselves. These are steps forward, even if the path feels familiar. There is also something deeply humbling about spiraling. It teaches us not to cling to any state, not even to clarity, because even insight can become another attachment if we think it guarantees immunity from future pain. The spiral brings us back again and again to the truth that awakening is not a destination. It is an ongoing unfolding, and the unfolding doesn't happen in perfect order. Sometimes we have to revisit the same pain many times, in many forms, before it fully releases. Sometimes what we thought was healed was only understood on one level, and a deeper layer now asks to be seen. This is not regression. This is refinement. Each return brings a new chance to meet suffering with more wisdom, not because we're trying to fix it, but because we're ready to see it more honestly. And that honesty, even when it hurts, is a gift. It means we're no longer pretending, we're no longer hiding, we're walking the path with our eyes wide open. In this way, samsara becomes not just a cycle of suffering, but a teacher. It repeats not to punish us, but to deepen our understanding. Like the seasons that return each year with new weather, new light, new textures, our internal seasons return as well, each time with more color, more detail, more insight. When we stop expecting ourselves to be finished, we begin to relax into the rhythm of growth. We learn to move with the spiral instead of resisting it. We begin to trust the process, not as something we control, but as something we commit to. We commit to showing up, to seeing clearly, to staying open even when the path bends unexpectedly. And this commitment is itself a form of liberation. It shifts our focus from perfection to presence, from arrival to awareness, from control to curiosity. The spiral doesn't require us to ascend without falling. It only asks that we continue walking with honesty. In the heart of every painful return lies the seed of transformation. The same pain seen with new eyes becomes a different experience. The spiral brings us back, not to where we started, but to a deeper version of the same lesson, and each time we return, we carry more light with us. This is how liberation unfolds, not in straight lines, but in spirals of understanding. Circles of learning that bring us ever closer to the quiet freedom already within. A freedom that cannot be broken by relapse, because it includes relapse. A freedom that does not fear repetition, because it trusts what is growing underneath it. And so we keep walking, we keep returning. Not because we are lost, but because we are spiraling home. Every return to suffering, when met with awareness, becomes a deeper invitation to understand. The spiral does not trap you. It reveals that growth is not about escape, but about presence. Each step, even the ones that feel backward, softens the ego and strengthens clarity. But even with that wisdom, the heart still longs for reassurance. We ask ourselves, is all this struggle worth it? Is there anything beautiful that comes from all this difficulty? Beneath that question lies the quiet hope that pain might have a purpose beyond itself. This is where the lotus speaks. In Buddhist tradition, the lotus is not a casual symbol. It is a living metaphor that embodies the entire path. It rises from thick, dark mud, not clean water, not pure air. Its beauty is inseparable from the dirt that surrounds it. And this image isn't about aesthetics. It points directly to the truth that awakening does not grow in spite of the mud, but because of it. The mud represents adversity, confusion, loss, and despair. It is not symbolic in a distant sense. It's your real life. The times when you felt unworthy, the moments you were cracked open by grief, the shame you carried silently, the anger you couldn't release, the fear you tried to bury. All of this is the ground in which the lotus roots itself, not clean, not perfect, but full of richness, full of nutrients, full of what is required to grow. What allows the lotus to bloom is not denial of the mud, but its full contact with it. The roots do not reject the mud, they draw strength from it. In the same way, your growth does not come from avoiding pain. It comes from being willing to feel it fully and to remain grounded in it without letting it define your essence. Spiritual purity, in this light, is not about innocence or detachment. It is about integrity. It is about living close to the truth of your experience without pretending to be somewhere you are not. It is the kind of clarity that comes from facing your own suffering with honesty and not turning away. This grounded presence is not built in moments of ease, but in moments when everything feels uncertain and you stay anyway. The lotus is also a symbol of transformation. Mud is not transformed by effort alone. It is transformed through time, through light, through stillness. Similarly, your inner work cannot be rushed. The pain you carry is not a sign of failure. It is a process unfolding in layers. Some parts heal quickly, others take years. But none of it is wasted. Every part of the process contributes to what you're becoming. To sit in the mud consciously is to practice radical acceptance. Not resignation, not defeat. Acceptance means seeing clearly what is here and choosing not to abandon yourself. When you do this, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start to feel less ashamed of the mud. You begin to trust its role in your growth. And this changes everything. You no longer wish your past away. You no longer resent the depth of your wounds. You begin to see that your softness, your insight, your capacity to love, all of it was shaped in the mud. The strength of the lotus is not just in its beauty, it is in its resilience. It rises because it is rooted. This is what spiritual strength looks like, not a rigid shield, but a flexible steadiness. You bend, but do not break. You are affected, but not destroyed. You suffer, but you do not turn bitter. That resilience is what transforms adversity into wisdom. In meditation, you may find that the most powerful shifts come not during the quietest moments, but during the most turbulent ones. When you stay with a painful emotion instead of fleeing, when you sit with restlessness and do not move, when you hold grief in your chest and breathe with it instead of collapsing, these moments become like the stem of the lotus, rising upward even through resistance. They build a kind of unshakable compassion that does not depend on conditions. There's a kind of humility that emerges from the mud. It dissolves arrogance. It reminds you that everyone suffers, that no one is above the mess of life, that even your highest aspirations are rooted in very human struggles. This humility is not weakness. It is the foundation of real connection. It allows you to walk through the world without needing to be better than anyone. Just real, just present, just aware that we are all walking through the same muddy ground in our own ways. This awareness opens the door to compassion, not just toward others, but toward yourself. You stop criticizing your setbacks. You stop demanding that you always rise clean. You allow yourself to be human. And in doing so, you become more available to others. You no longer need to fix them. You simply stay with them. You understand that pain doesn't always need solutions. Sometimes it just needs presence. That's something the lotus teaches too. It does not rush its growth. It simply exists fully in every stage of becoming. There's also a powerful teaching here about timing. The lotus does not bloom when we want it to. It blooms when the conditions are right. This reminds us to be patient with our process. Just because something isn't visible yet doesn't mean it isn't happening. Much of the most important growth is invisible, happening underground, in silence, in stillness. Trusting this brings a deeper kind of faith, not in an outcome, but in the process itself. In practice, this means meeting each experience, joyful or painful, with presence and kindness. Not waiting for conditions to improve before you become open, but remaining open because conditions are difficult. This is the essence of the lotus. It does not avoid the mud. It emerges from it with grace. You may find that some of the most painful parts of your journey eventually become your greatest sources of compassion. What once hurt you deeply now allows you to feel others more fully. Your pain becomes a bridge, a point of contact, a silent connection that requires no explanation. This is not an accident. It is the natural result of presence. When you stay with your suffering instead of running from it, it teaches you things that comfort never could. The purity of the lotus is not a rejection of pain, but a refinement of it. It is not untouched by the world. It is shaped by it. And so are you. You are not less spiritual because you struggle. You are not further from awakening because your past is complex. You are not broken because you feel deeply. These are not signs of distance from the path. They are the path. What matters most is not whether your life is clean, but whether you are willing to remain present with whatever it brings. Whether you can hold sorrow with kindness, whether you can meet failure with honesty, whether you can stay open even when every part of you wants to close. This is what turns mud into soil. This is what allows the lotus to bloom, not by removing the dirt, but by transforming your relationship to it. So the next time life feels heavy, or messy, or unclear, remember that this too is part of your unfolding. That the pressure you feel may be what strengthens your roots. That the confusion you face may be what teaches you stillness. That the pain you carry may be the very thing that prepares you to bloom. And that bloom, when it comes, will not make you better than others. It will make you more human, more whole, more grounded in the truth that beauty and difficulty are never separate. They grow together, just like the lotus and the mud. The lotus shows us how purity can rise from hardship, how clarity can bloom from within confusion. But there's one truth that underlies all spiritual growth, one that humbles every part of the human journey and cuts through illusion more sharply than any teaching. It is the truth we resist the most, and yet the one that holds the greatest potential to wake us up fully. That truth is impermanence, seen in its most undeniable form: death. We don't talk about death because we fear what it takes from us. We avoid it because it reminds us of our limits. Yet the teachings of the Buddha turn this exact fear into a gateway. Maranasati, or death awareness, is not a dark or morbid practice. It is one of the most profound tools for liberation. It asks us not to obsess over endings, but to live with a clearer understanding of what truly matters. When we meditate on death, we don't increase fear, we reduce it, because fear thrives in what we avoid. When we turn toward death instead of away, something powerful happens. We begin to see that loss is not the exception in life. It is the nature of life. Everything we know, everyone we love, even our own breath, is temporary. But this truth, when fully held, doesn't shrink us. It expands us. It deepens how we love, how we serve, how we show up right now. Maranasati begins with facing the simple fact: death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. We can ignore this fact for years, but it doesn't stop it from being true. Bringing this truth into awareness isn't meant to depress us. It's meant to cut through distractions. All the things we worry about, status, perfection, minor annoyances, begin to fall away when seen through the lens of mortality. What remains is a stripped-down clarity, a direct sense of what is meaningful. This clarity is not intellectual. It is felt in the body. It becomes real when we sit with the idea of our own end, not as a concept, but as something that could arrive at any time. That urgency does not cause panic. It brings presence. It shifts our attention to this moment, this breath, this opportunity to be kind, to forgive, to let go. Practicing Maranasati doesn't require a special ritual. It begins by reflecting daily on the truth that life is fleeting. Each time you wake up, you remind yourself that this day is not guaranteed to repeat. Each time you eat, you recognize the gift of nourishment. Each time you speak, you consider the impact of your words. Death contemplation turns routine into sacred awareness. This presence affects how we deal with suffering. Loss doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like part of the rhythm. We stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin to understand that nothing was ever meant to last. This understanding doesn't make grief disappear, but it makes it more bearable. We grieve with wisdom, not just resistance. We feel sadness, but without the added suffering of believing that impermanence is wrong. Death awareness also reshapes how we relate to others. Knowing we don't have unlimited time makes us more patient, more honest, more tender. We no longer put off the important conversations. We stop holding grudges that weigh down the heart. We become more generous, not because we're trying to be good, but because we realize how short the window of giving truly is. Even our ambitions shift. When we stop pretending we'll live forever, we begin to ask different questions. Not, "What do I want to achieve?" but, "What do I want to give?" Not, "How do I get more?" but, "How do I live with purpose?" These questions don't come from pressure. They come from alignment with truth. Maranasati is also deeply grounding. When fear arises, Death awareness gives it context. We realize that many of our fears are based on trying to protect what we cannot ultimately keep. We fear failure, rejection, loss, because we think they take something from us. But when we remember that everything is already passing, those fears soften. We see that our task is not to preserve life, but to participate in it fully while we're here. This doesn't mean we become careless. It means we become sincere. We care more deeply. We speak more directly. We waste less time. And this creates a very different kind of life. A life rooted in reality, not in illusion. A life that is both tender and powerful. Meditating on death also reduces self-centeredness. It reminds us that we are part of something larger, that we belong to the same cycle as everyone else. No one escapes impermanence. This makes us more humble, more connected, more able to hold others in their pain because we know that we are not separate from it. There is also a surprising peace that comes from facing death directly. When we stop pretending it won't happen, we begin to live with less attachment. We start to release the grip on how things should be. We stop needing life to follow our exact plans, and in that surrender, we find space. The pressure lifts, the mind calms. Some practitioners even report that regular contemplation of death removes the background anxiety they didn't know they were carrying. Because so much of our tension comes from resisting this one truth. Once we stop resisting it, life becomes simpler, not easier, but more aligned. This simplicity doesn't mean we give up goals. It means we hold them differently. We stop trying to secure the future and start using the present with care. Every day becomes a field of practice. Every conversation a chance to deepen connection. Every breath a reminder. This could be the last, and that makes it precious. Maranasati is not about obsessing over endings. It is about recognizing beginnings. Each moment fully lived is a kind of rebirth. Each time we turn toward the truth, we are born into greater honesty, greater compassion, greater peace. This practice also brings depth to spiritual growth. When you remember your own death, you stop comparing yourself to others. You stop needing to prove anything. You become more inwardly free. You practice not to become special, but to become clear, to live in alignment with what is real. And in this clarity, something powerful emerges. Gratitude. Gratitude not as an emotion, but as a way of seeing. You begin to recognize that every ordinary moment is a gift, that your ability to breathe, to move, to love, none of it is promised, all of it is borrowed. And when you see this, you treat life with more respect. You also become more courageous, not fearless, but willing. You are no longer paralyzed by what might happen because you've already looked at the final outcome. You've made peace with it. And from that peace, action becomes more natural. You take risks that matter. You speak the truth even when it's hard. You live from your values, not your fears. Even in the face of loss, death awareness helps you stay grounded. You may still feel sorrow, but it doesn't overwhelm you. You understand that grief is the price of love, that letting go is not the end of connection, that remembrance is its own form of presence. In time, the practice of Maranasati becomes more than a meditation. It becomes a way of being. You live in a state of quiet readiness, not waiting for death, but not denying it. And this readiness brings a unique joy, Not the joy of distraction, but the joy of knowing you are awake. You are here. You are using your life well. This is the transformation death contemplation offers. Not morbid thinking, not cold detachment, but full engagement with what is real. A love for life that doesn't depend on its permanence. A strength that grows from honesty. A heart that does not fear the end because it knows how to live the middle with grace. This is what Maranasati gives you. Not protection from death, but liberation from the fear of it. Not escape from grief, but the strength to walk through it. Not a guarantee of peace, but the clarity to choose it moment by moment. And that choice, to live fully aware of the impermanent nature of all things, is the beginning of true freedom. When we reflect on death with presence, something softens in the way we relate to life. We begin to understand that nothing we experience truly belongs to us, that all things arise and pass in the great unfolding of conditions. From this space of humility, a new awareness begins to grow, one that sees beyond the boundary of self. We start to notice that our joy is not only ours, and our pain is not only ours. Everything we feel, everything we carry, is woven into something larger. This is where the teaching of interbeing opens a deeper layer of truth. Thich Nhat Hanh used the word interbeing to describe the reality that nothing exists in isolation. Every person, every leaf, every breath is connected to everything else. The cloud becomes the rain becomes the tea becomes the conversation, and the conversation becomes understanding. We do not exist separately. We arise in relationship. And nowhere is this more clear than in the realm of suffering. To suffer is often seen as a private experience. We retreat into ourselves when we're hurt. We feel alone in our grief, misunderstood in our fear, isolated in our pain. But when we begin to understand interbeing, we see that suffering is not a solitary burden. It is shared, not in a way that adds weight, but in a way that creates depth. What hurts in you is felt somewhere in me. What breaks in one part of the world echoes through all others. This is not metaphor, it is truth. Empathic suffering is what happens when we become aware of this connection. It is not taking on others' pain as our own, nor is it drowning in sorrow. It is allowing the boundaries between self and other to soften, so that compassion can move freely. It is the understanding that when another being suffers, that suffering touches us, if we are awake enough to feel it. This awareness does not lead to helplessness, it leads to caring. When we recognize that we are not separate, we begin to live more gently. We see the pain in someone's eyes, and we listen more closely. We feel the tension in a room, and we offer our calm. We hear a story of injustice, and we respond, not from guilt or anger, but from connection. Because it is no longer their suffering, it is our world. The practice of interbeing invites us to feel deeply without shutting down, to witness suffering in others without being consumed by it. This requires balance. If we resist, we disconnect. If we cling, we collapse. But if we stay open, we begin to feel the pulse of shared humanity that runs beneath all the stories. That pulse is where healing begins, not through fixing others, but through recognizing ourselves in them. Thich Nhat Hanh often spoke about seeing the garbage in the flower and the flower in the garbage. This is the essence of interbeing. There is no pure self or pure other. There is only the dance of causes and conditions. This means that when we judge someone, we are judging a reflection of something that lives in us. When we forgive someone, we are freeing ourselves as well. Empathy becomes a form of insight. It shows us where we are still holding on, where we are still afraid, where we are still human. To grow through the pain of others is to allow their suffering to open your heart, not out of duty, but out of understanding. This might happen when you sit with a friend who is grieving and realize you don't need to say anything. Just being there is enough. It might happen when you read about people suffering across the world and feel moved to act, not from outrage alone, but from the recognition that their lives are part of yours. This kind of awareness does not drain you. It nourishes you, because it reconnects you to what matters. When you stop living in separation, you stop trying to build your happiness on top of others' pain. You stop pretending you can be free while others are not. And that changes the choices you make, how you spend your time, what you support, what you stand for. Empathic suffering teaches you that pain is not something to be feared or avoided. It is something to be felt with wisdom. The pain of others becomes a mirror that shows you the capacity of your heart. And sometimes that pain breaks you open, but in the best way. It breaks the shell of indifference, the shell of apathy. It reveals the raw truth that love always includes some risk. This is not weakness, it is spiritual courage. The courage to stay present with suffering that is not your own. The courage to not turn away. The courage to keep your heart soft in a world that often rewards hardness. Interbeing also dissolves the illusion that we must carry our burdens alone. When we suffer, we often believe no one else could understand. But when we open to others, we see that our pain is echoed in different forms all around us. The details may differ, but the essence is shared. Loss, fear, longing, joy, these move through us all. And when we allow ourselves to be seen, something shifts. The pain becomes lighter, not because it's gone, but because it is no longer isolated. This is why community matters on the path. Not just as a support system, but as a mirror. Others reflect back to us our blind spots, our growth, our courage. In Sangha, in friendship, in shared practice, we learn that awakening is not an individual achievement. It is a collective unfolding. We rise together. And this collective view helps us move from awareness into action. When we understand that suffering is shared, we are called to respond, not with frantic solutions, but with steady compassion. We see where systems cause harm, and we work to change them. We see where healing is needed, and we offer what we can. Our practice becomes embodied, not just on the cushion, but in the way we live. Thich Nhat Hanh taught that peace is not something you find at the end of your journey. It is something you cultivate in every step, in every breath, in every interaction. And the more we see ourselves in others, the more we realize that every act of kindness is an act of healing the whole. This does not mean taking on every burden. It means acting from interconnection. It means knowing that your clarity supports others' clarity, your peace supports others' peace. Your healing supports the collective. Empathic suffering can also transform the way we view those who harm. When we see even perpetrators of harm as caught in their own suffering, we stop dehumanizing them. This doesn't mean we condone their actions. It means we refuse to hate. We see that their violence often comes from confusion, trauma, fear, and we hold space for the possibility of their transformation, even if we still set boundaries. This view is not naive. It is deeply rooted in wisdom. It understands that healing systems requires healing people, that justice includes compassion, that lasting change cannot be built on separation. In your own life, this awareness might show up in small ways. Choosing to listen more than speak. Offering patience when someone lashes out. Practicing forgiveness not because it's easy, but because you understand the pain behind the action. These are not grand gestures, but they change the field around you. They create the conditions for healing to spread. And healing is contagious. Just like suffering spreads through unawareness, healing spreads through presence, through empathy, through connection. You don't need to fix the world. You only need to stay connected to it, to feel it, to let it shape your choices. This is the heart of interbeing. A life not lived in isolation, but in response. A spirituality not built on escape, but on return. Return to each other. Return to what binds us. Return to what sets us free. Together. When the illusion of separateness dissolves through interbeing, and the pain of others becomes a mirror instead of a wall, a subtle but powerful shift begins to take place. You stop relating to suffering as something happening outside you, or even to you. Instead, you begin to see it as something happening through you, a part of life moving through consciousness, calling not for retreat, but for awakening. From this space, the question that once echoed in pain, "Why me?" begins to fade. It is replaced by a deeper inquiry. What now? That question, born not from despair but from presence, marks the beginning of what the Buddha called right view. Right view is the first step of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's not just about what you believe. It's about how you see, how you interpret your experience, how you relate to the truth of your life. And nowhere is right view more needed than in how we meet suffering. Because suffering is inevitable, but how we meet it, how we frame it, respond to it, learn from it, is what determines whether it becomes our prison or our path. Right view doesn't ask you to deny your pain. It asks you to examine how you understand it. Most of us are conditioned to see suffering as a form of punishment, as something unfair or personal. We carry a hidden belief that things should go a certain way, and when they don't, we conclude that life has betrayed us, or that we are somehow defective. This is the lens of victimhood. And while the pain in that view is real, the story around it keeps us stuck. From a Buddhist perspective, right view gently invites us to let go of that narrative. It shows us that suffering is not unique to us. It is part of the universal condition. This shift from personalization to universality is not cold, it's freeing. It allows us to stop taking suffering as a reflection of our worth, and instead begin seeing it as a reflection of causes and conditions. Things arise, things fall away, And through it all, we have the capacity to awaken. This shift doesn't mean we avoid feeling. It means we stop getting entangled in the added suffering of "this shouldn't be happening." Right view helps us see clearly. This is happening. And that clarity becomes the ground from which wise response grows. Instead of being paralyzed by pain, we begin to explore it. To ask, what is this moment asking of me? What needs to be seen, to be released, to be accepted? In this light, suffering becomes information. It reveals attachment, expectation, fear. It shows us where we are still clinging, and once we see that, the work becomes internal. Not trying to control the outer world, but transforming our inner relationship with it. Right view also helps us distinguish between pain and identity. It says, you may be hurting, but you are not broken. This is passing through you, not defining you. That understanding can be life-changing. It gives you permission to feel without collapsing into the feeling. It opens space between the event and the story about the event. And in that space, choice returns. When you adopt right view, you begin to ask different questions. You stop demanding that life be easy and start asking how to meet difficulty with wisdom. You stop needing to be rescued and start practicing resilience. You stop asking, when will this end? And start exploring, how can this deepen me? None of this means becoming passive. On the contrary, right view is active. It requires attention, curiosity, and the willingness to let go of familiar but painful beliefs. It invites you to stand in the middle of discomfort without needing to label yourself as a victim or a failure. It reminds you that suffering is not a detour. It is part of the path. In meditation, this view becomes especially clear. When pain arises, whether physical or emotional, you can observe how the mind adds resistance. Thoughts like, this is too much, I can't handle this, or why is this happening again, intensify the suffering. But when you drop into direct awareness, when you feel the pain without the commentary, it becomes more workable. You can breathe with it. You can let it move. You can notice how it shifts. This is the essence of right view in practice, meeting each moment as it is, not as the mind wants it to be. Right view is not an endpoint. It is a foundation. It shapes how you see everything, from your internal struggles to your relationships, your past, and even your spiritual aspirations. When you see suffering as fertile ground for growth, rather than as proof of failure, your whole orientation changes. You become more compassionate with yourself. You become more patient with others. You stop needing life to validate you and start using life as a mirror for awakening. This shift also redefines success. Success is no longer about control, avoidance, or accumulation. It becomes about presence, clarity, and alignment with truth. It becomes about showing up fully in whatever life brings, not because it's easy, but because you know this is where the real work happens. Right view also encourages humility. It helps you let go of the idea that you should have everything figured out. It teaches you that confusion, struggle, and doubt are part of the unfolding, that you're not supposed to be above your suffering, you're supposed to be present with it. And from that presence, wisdom arises naturally. This presence brings new depth to compassion, You no longer see others' pain as separate from your own. You stop judging how people carry their wounds and start recognizing the courage it takes to face them at all. Your empathy deepens, your patience expands, and your heart becomes more inclusive. This is how right view leads to liberation, not by removing difficulty, but by changing how you hold it, by transforming suffering from an obstacle into a teacher, by helping you see that every painful moment is an opportunity to step out of the cycle of reactivity and into the clarity of awareness. And from that awareness, a quiet strength begins to grow. The kind of strength that doesn't come from having all the answers, but from staying honest in the unknown. The kind of strength that meets change with flexibility, that holds grief without losing joy, that walks through fear without closing the heart. In the end, right view is not a belief. It is a way of seeing, a way of living, a commitment to truth, to presence, to depth. It asks nothing more than your attention. It requires nothing more than your willingness to look again, to see suffering not as a trap, but as an invitation. And when you accept that invitation, something begins to shift, not just in your mind, but in the way you move through the world. You become more rooted, more awake, more free. Not because life has changed, but because you have. Because you've stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" That simple shift is the doorway. And through it, a different kind of life begins. Not one without pain, but one illuminated by wisdom. A life where every moment becomes a step on the path, and every hardship becomes a call to see more clearly, feel more fully, and love more deeply. When the view becomes clear, and suffering is no longer seen as a punishment, but as a path, the next step is to ask with sincerity, what exactly is it that suffers? If there is no fixed self, no unchanging identity at the center of our experience, then where does pain land? Where does it move? What is it that feels? This question, when explored with depth, leads to one of the Buddha's most precise teachings, the 5 aggregates, or skandhas. This is not theory for its own sake. It is a map of direct experience, one that shows how pain arises, how it takes shape, and how it begins to dissolve when we see it clearly. The 5 aggregates are the components of what we usually call the self. They are not separate from us, nor do they make up a solid identity. Instead, they are the flowing processes that come together moment by moment to create the illusion of a unified me. When we suffer, it is these aggregates that interact. When we awaken, it is these same aggregates that become transparent. The first aggregate is form, rupa. This is the physical body, the material aspect of experience. It includes the body itself and the objects that come into contact with it, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches. When pain shows up physically, tightness in the chest, aching limbs, a pounding heart, it is in the realm of form. This aggregate does not act alone. It responds to and influences all the others. The second aggregate is feeling, vedana. This refers not to emotion, but to the basic tone of each experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every moment of contact between form and consciousness has a feeling tone. When pain arises, it is usually felt as unpleasant. This tone triggers reactions, especially when we are unconscious of it. We chase what is pleasant and resist what is unpleasant, often without realizing that this chasing and resisting adds an extra layer of suffering. Vedana is subtle but powerful. It is the spark that often ignites craving or aversion. The third aggregate is perception, sanya. This is the process of recognizing and labeling. It is how we know that the thing in front of us is a chair, a face, a memory, a threat. Perception helps us organize experience, but it can also be shaped by past conditioning. When we experience pain, perception quickly assigns meaning. This is bad. This means I'm weak. This always happens to me. These labels strengthen the identity around pain, but when we see perception as a process, we start to question it. We realize we don't have to believe everything our mind names as truth. The fourth aggregate is mental formations, sankhara. This includes all the volitional elements of mind, thoughts, intentions, habits, emotions, and reactions. This is where karma begins to form. Our repeated responses to pain, our conditioned narratives, the stories we tell ourselves, all live here. When pain arises and a thought like, "I can't take this anymore," follows, that's a mental formation. These are not just reactions, they are patterns that shape how we meet experience. They are also trainable. When seen clearly, they can be redirected. Compassion can replace judgment. Curiosity can replace fear. But that shift begins with awareness. The fifth aggregate is consciousness, vijnana. This is the knowing faculty. It is not a self, but the awareness that arises in response to experience. There is visual consciousness, auditory consciousness, and so on, each one dependent on contact. Consciousness is not a thing we possess. It is an ongoing interaction between the mind and the object of attention. When pain arises, consciousness knows it. When mindfulness is present, consciousness includes that knowing in a broader field of awareness, reducing identification. Consciousness by itself is not the problem. The problem comes when we take its contents as permanent or personal. Together, these 5 aggregates weave the tapestry of suffering, not because they are flawed, but because we misunderstand them. We grasp at form as if the body won't change. We chase pleasant feeling and flee unpleasant feeling. We believe perception is always accurate. We let mental formations run automatically. We mistake consciousness for a permanent observer. And all the while, we call this tangle me. But when we slow down and examine experience through the lens of the aggregates, a different picture appears. We see that pain is not one solid block. It is a dynamic interplay, a shifting dance, a process, not a prison. This recognition doesn't erase pain, but it removes the extra suffering caused by misidentification. This breakdown is especially useful in meditation. When discomfort arises, we can ask, what is actually happening right now? Is it a physical sensation, a judgment, a memory, an emotional reaction? Where does it begin and end? What tone does it carry? How does the mind respond? These questions turn suffering into something we can investigate. They transform the experience from a wall into a doorway. Using the aggregates as tools, we begin to develop discernment. We stop treating pain as a single enemy and start seeing it as a complex event with many moving parts. This helps us intervene more wisely. If the problem is an unhelpful perception, we can question it. If the issue is clinging to pleasant feelings, we can soften. If the suffering is rooted in old mental habits, we can retrain the mind. The aggregates don't give us easy answers, but they give us clarity. And clarity is the beginning of freedom. This freedom grows over time. As we practice seeing the aggregates in daily life, we become less reactive. We begin to notice that some experiences are just passing sensations. Others are emotional echoes. Some are memories pretending to be current truths. All are part of a flowing system, not evidence of a fixed self. This view also helps us develop compassion. When we see that others are caught in the same play of aggregates, we stop judging them so harshly. We understand that their anger, fear, or confusion is not their essence. It is a temporary arrangement of conditions. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it allows us to meet others with empathy instead of blame. The aggregates also point us toward impermanence. Each component arises and fades, influenced by internal and external factors. There is no stable core holding it all together. What we call identity is a moving target. This insight can feel unsettling at first, but over time it becomes liberating. If there is no solid self, then we don't have to protect one. We can relate to experience more lightly, more openly, more skillfully. In the context of suffering, this understanding reduces fear. Pain no longer feels like an attack on who we are. It is simply a ripple in the system. Sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but always changing. And because it changes, it can be met, held, transformed. This doesn't make us indifferent. It makes us wise. We stop chasing false solutions and start practicing presence. We stop resisting reality and start working with it. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of understanding suffering. Not analyzing it endlessly, but seeing its components clearly. Seeing that what suffers is not a fixed self, but a conditioned process. And that process, while complex, is not unmanageable. It is workable. It can be observed, trained, and supported by mindfulness, compassion, and understanding. The more we see the aggregates in real time, the more we untangle the web of reactivity. We create space. We reconnect to awareness. We discover that the pain is not personal, even when it feels intimate. So, the next time suffering arises, pause. Look closer. Ask not just, why is this happening? But, what is this made of? What part of the mind is reacting? What part of the body is speaking? What beliefs are active? What memories are resurfacing? This gentle inquiry is not just mental, it is experiential. It brings suffering into the light of awareness, where transformation begins. In this light, suffering is no longer the enemy. It becomes a messenger, a teacher, a doorway to deeper seeing. Not of who you are as a static self, but of what you are as a living process, fluid, impermanent, and full of potential for awakening. When we break suffering down through the 5 aggregates, we discover there is no singular self that suffers. only patterns of interaction, conditions coming together and falling apart. This understanding offers us more than insight. It gives us space. But space alone is not enough. There is still something deeper that keeps pain active even after we recognize its components. That something is clinging. We do not suffer simply because there is discomfort. We suffer because we hold it tightly. We resist it, define ourselves by it, or grasp at its opposite. And what fuels this holding is fire, craving, aversion, and ignorance. To reach true peace, that fire must go out. This is where the path turns toward nirvana. Nirvana is often misunderstood as a distant goal, a kind of spiritual reward or mystical place. But the Buddha's teaching offers something more immediate and grounded. Nirvana means extinguishment, not of life, but of the fire within that burns us from the inside. It is the cooling of the flame that fuels endless suffering. Not the elimination of experience, but the end of grasping. This fire expresses itself through three poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. These are not abstract concepts. They are felt every time we crave what is not here, reject what is present, or misunderstand what we are. They keep the cycle of reactivity alive. Greed pulls us toward what we think will complete us. Hatred pushes away what threatens our comfort. Delusion clouds the clarity that would free us. As long as these fires burn, even the most beautiful moment is shadowed by fear and attachment. Letting go is not a single act. It is the consistent practice of non-attachment, not indifference, but a wise release. To let go is to stop feeding the flames. It does not mean avoiding emotion or experience. It means meeting every moment without needing it to become something else. Letting go begins when we stop demanding permanence in a world built on change. This does not happen through willpower alone. It happens through understanding. When we see deeply that everything we cling to is impermanent, unreliable, and ultimately not self, the grip weakens. We begin to notice how every craving carries with it a seed of suffering. The tighter we hold, the more it hurts when life moves, as it always will. Pain cannot be eliminated by force, but it can be held without possession. And in that holding, we find something radical: freedom. Not freedom from discomfort, but freedom from identification with it. This is nirvana, not the absence of experience, but the absence of burning. One of the most powerful realizations on this path is that the problem is not pain, but resistance. Pain arises. It is part of being human. But when we resist pain, fear it, or build identity around it, we trap ourselves in a cycle that keeps it alive long after the cause has passed. Letting go means no longer believing that our peace depends on controlling pain. It means trusting that peace is available even in the middle of difficulty if we stop feeding the story around it. This freedom is not cold or distant. It is the deepest form of intimacy with life. It means we meet joy without clinging, sorrow without despair, change without panic. We respond instead of react. We relate without grasping. We love without possession. This kind of living is not numb. It is fully awake. The path to nirvana moves through fire, not around it. We don't reach freedom by escaping the world or bypassing what's hard. We walk through it with awareness. We allow the fire to burn away illusion, pride, and false hope. What remains is not emptiness in the hollow sense, but emptiness of clinging. That is spaciousness, not void. It is clarity, not absence. In meditation, we can observe how quickly the fire is reignited. A sound, a thought, a memory. Suddenly the mind is off chasing, resisting, fantasizing, or regretting. Each of these is a spark. But with mindfulness, we begin to see them clearly. We stop throwing fuel. We rest in the flame without adding to it. Over time, the fire cools, and in that cooling, the nervous system settles. The mind becomes still. This is not because the world has changed, but because we have stopped fighting it. This surrender is not collapse. It is wisdom. It knows the difference between control and care, between effort and struggle. Letting go becomes a daily practice, moment by moment. It is not dramatic. It is steady. We let go of the need to be right, the need to be seen a certain way, the need to control outcomes, and each time we do, something tight inside loosens. Nirvana is not found in some future moment. It is tasted each time we release the impulse to grasp, each time we meet life without demanding it comfort us, each time we bow to impermanence with grace rather than resistance. These are the small extinguishments that prepare us for the great one, not death, but the death of illusion. Letting go does not mean losing connection. It means relating more honestly. When we stop needing things to be fixed, we start loving them as they are. This applies to people, to emotions, to our own inner world. And this kind of love is free from clinging. It is love that does not burn. Many fear letting go because they confuse it with indifference. But the opposite is true. Clinging is what blocks intimacy. It comes from fear, not connection. Letting go allows us to be truly present, to see others without projecting onto them, to listen without needing to control what we hear, to feel without building walls around feeling. Letting go also means releasing identities. We cling to roles, to stories, to old versions of ourselves that no longer serve. And the more tightly we hold them, the more trapped we feel. When we let go of needing to be someone specific, we allow life to move through us freely. We become adaptable, resilient, at peace in the face of change. This transformation does not happen overnight. It is cultivated through practice, through patience, through repeated moments of turning inward and releasing the next layer. Sometimes it feels like burning, because it is. The fire consumes what is no longer needed, but it does not destroy us. It refines us. It reveals what cannot be burned, awareness itself. Awareness is what remains when the fire goes out. It is not dependent on pleasure or pain. It is not bound by identity. It is simply here, spacious, still, and clear. This is what we return to again and again. This is the heart of nirvana, not something we gain, but something we uncover by letting go. This letting go is not passive. It requires courage. To release what we've clung to for safety, to face what we've avoided, to soften where we've built armor, and it is ongoing. There is no final moment of complete letting go, There is only this moment, this breath, this chance to loosen the grip a little more. We begin to see that the more we let go, the more we gain, not in possessions, but in presence, not in certainty, but in freedom. The mind no longer needs to chase peace. It becomes peace. Not because it has conquered life, but because it has surrendered to it. And this surrender is the most powerful act we can make. It is not the end of the path. It is the path itself, the path of burning through illusion and stepping into a life that no longer depends on anything staying the same. In the quiet after the fire, there is no need for control, no craving for permanence, no fear of loss. There is just this, a stillness that holds everything, a clarity that needs nothing, a freedom that is already here, waiting to be remembered. Letting go cools the fires of suffering, but the practice of release is not only a matter of the mind. It lives in the body too. It moves with breath, with step, with grounded rhythm. Awareness doesn't only happen on the cushion or in silent meditation. It is embodied, lived, and carried with us. When the storms of life return, the body becomes the first place where suffering is felt. But it can also become the place where presence returns. When thoughts feel overwhelming and emotions cloud perception, one of the most effective and accessible tools we have is mindful walking. Mindful walking is not a technique for escaping pain. It is a way of anchoring ourselves in the middle of it. Rather than being swept away by mental activity, we allow the body to ground our awareness. The steps become our focus. Each movement, each placement of the foot becomes a bridge between attention and aliveness. In this simplicity, we rediscover what it means to stay with what is real. Walking meditation invites us to reconnect with the present without needing to fix or solve anything. There is no goal but to be fully here, not in the past, where regret pulls us, not in the future, where fear waits, but in this step, this breath, this moment. As we bring our attention into the movement, suffering no longer overwhelms us. It becomes part of the rhythm. We carry it, not with resistance, but with care. The practice is straightforward but powerful. We walk slowly, deliberately. We place each foot on the ground with awareness. We feel the heel touch, then the ball of the foot, then the toes. We breathe. We notice sensations. We soften the shoulders, loosen the jaw, and let the arms move naturally. If thoughts arise, we don't follow them. We return to the next step. If emotions arise, we allow them to be felt, but we stay anchored in the body. The path is not to suppress, but to stay rooted. This physical movement brings us out of abstraction. Suffering often grows in the mind because it feeds on stories. What happened? What could have happened? What might happen? Walking brings us back to what is actually happening. The body becomes a compass. It points us away from spirals of thought and into the immediate experience of now. Suffering that lives in the chest or stomach can feel overwhelming when we sit still. But when we move, we allow energy to flow. We give space for what hurts. We do not try to explain it. We just carry it with our breath, step by step. This is not escape. It is contact with reality in a way that does not drown us. In mindful walking, we learn that we do not need to rush. We do not need to arrive anywhere. The very act of walking with awareness becomes a form of healing. Each step becomes a statement. I am here. That presence, when repeated again and again, becomes stronger than the chaos of the mind. This kind of walking is especially helpful when the heart feels heavy. When sadness, grief, or anger arise, and we cannot find the words to process them, we walk. We let the body speak. We give ourselves space to move without pressure, without judgment. The earth holds us. The breath reminds us that we are alive, and in this aliveness, we begin to remember that we are more than our pain. Walking mindfully also cultivates patience. It slows the pace of modern life. It interrupts the urgency that suffering often brings. In walking slowly, we learn to observe. We notice how thoughts rise and pass, how tension builds and releases, how the breath anchors us again and again. The world moves fast, but we do not have to. We reclaim our time, our body, our presence. When practiced regularly, mindful walking deepens our awareness in daily life. It teaches us to bring attention into movement, not just in formal practice, but in everyday activity. Walking to the store becomes a meditation. Moving through a hallway becomes an opportunity to ground. We stop waiting for quiet moments to practice presence. We carry presence with us wherever we go. Walking meditation also teaches balance. We learn to be with suffering without being consumed by it. The rhythm of the steps mirrors the rhythm of life. Ups and downs, tension and release, stillness and movement. As we learn to walk with suffering, we learn to walk through life, with steadiness, with grace, with a heart that is open, not because it avoids pain, but because it knows how to hold it. In this practice, the body becomes a teacher. It shows us what is needed. When we listen closely, we begin to understand when to rest, when to move, when to breathe more deeply, when to pause. This self-awareness becomes the foundation of resilience. We no longer abandon ourselves in times of stress. We return to the body. We return to the ground beneath our feet. Walking also reminds us of our connection to the earth. Each step is supported. Each movement is held by something greater. In a world that often feels unstable, this is a quiet reassurance. The ground does not ask us to be perfect. It asks only that we arrive fully, that we trust its presence, that we meet it with each step. Mindful walking can be practiced anywhere. In nature, it deepens our relationship to the living world. In the city, it slows the rush of modern life. In a room, it reconnects us to space. We don't need a forest or silence to begin. We only need intention and attention. Wherever we are, the steps can begin. The benefits of walking mindfully extend beyond the moments we are on our feet. Over time, it changes how we face challenges. When difficulty arises, we are less likely to react from panic. We remember the steps, the breath, the body. We know how to ground ourselves, and this grounding becomes a refuge, a place we can return to when everything else feels unstable. This refuge is not built from escape. It is built from presence, from walking through pain, not around it, from allowing the body to carry what the mind cannot hold alone. In each step, we remind ourselves that we are not powerless, we are not lost, we are walking, consciously, courageously, compassionately. Even in the most painful moments, there is still breath, still movement, still the choice to return. This is the power of mindful walking. It does not require us to feel better. It does not require understanding. It simply invites us to walk, to breathe, to stay close to our experience. And in that closeness, something softens, something settles, something opens. Mindful walking through suffering is not a cure. It is a path. A way to be with what is difficult without losing ourselves in it. A way to bring the mind home to the body. A way to remember that every step taken in awareness is a step toward freedom. Not freedom from pain, but freedom within it. This practice invites us back to simplicity, back to breath, back to the ground, back to the body that has always been here, waiting patiently for our return. We walk not to arrive at a destination, but to arrive in ourselves, to remember that presence is always one step away, one breath away, always here, waiting to be reclaimed. As each mindful step returns us to the body and anchors us in the now, we begin to recognize that the most difficult moments are not always physical. Often, it is the emotional undercurrent, the quiet inner storms that pull us off center. And even when the body is still and the breath is calm, the mind still flares with stories, memories, and reactions. When we pay attention closely, we begin to see a pattern. Suffering is rarely random. It arises in familiar shapes, triggered by similar situations, resurfacing again and again. These emotional responses, far from meaningless, are mirrors. They reflect something deeper, hidden beliefs, wounded identities, unresolved ideas of who we think we are. Suffering becomes a mirror through which the ego sees itself. When unpleasant emotions arise, we often try to move past them quickly. Anger, jealousy, shame, resentment, each one brings discomfort, so we push it aside, act it out, or numb ourselves to it. But in Buddhist practice, these very emotions are not to be dismissed. They are doorways. They point directly to where our sense of self is tight, where it is fragile, where it is defending something it doesn't want to lose. If we meet these emotions with honest inquiry instead of resistance, they show us what the ego is holding on to. The ego is not an enemy. It is a structure built from experience, trying to protect us. It forms around wounds, hopes, fears, and expectations. But because it operates from habit, not awareness, it becomes rigid. It builds walls instead of windows. And when life challenges those walls, when someone disrespects us, when a plan falls apart, when we're not seen the way we want to be, the emotional response is not just about the moment. It is about the self-image we have constructed being threatened. Each time pain arises, we can pause and ask, what part of me feels exposed right now? What belief is being challenged? What expectation is going unmet? These questions do not come from judgment. They come from curiosity. They help us turn toward the pain, not to fix it instantly, but to understand it. This understanding is not intellectual. It is felt in the body, sensed in the breath, observed in the mind. It requires presence, not analysis. For example, if someone ignores us and we feel a wave of hurt, the suffering is not just about their behavior. It reflects something internal, perhaps a need to be valued, an old feeling of invisibility, or a story that says love must always look a certain way. The pain points us to a belief the ego carries: I am only worthy if I am seen. This belief is not the problem. It is the hiding of it that causes suffering. Once seen, it can be questioned, and once questioned, it begins to loosen. The mirror of suffering is not always clear. Sometimes it takes repeated patterns to begin to see what is being reflected. When similar emotional reactions appear in different relationships or situations, it signals something unresolved inside. We may blame the external world, but the repetition reveals that the root is within us. This is not blame, it is empowerment. It means we are not helpless. We can explore the patterns and uncover what lies beneath. This exploration is not about erasing the ego. It is about softening its grip, about seeing where it has taken center stage and quietly, gently asking it to step aside. The self that suffers is usually the self that clings. It clings to ideas of how things should be, how we should be seen, how others should behave. These ideas, when unexamined, become traps, but when brought into awareness, they become teachings. One powerful practice is simply to sit with the unpleasant without needing to fix it. To feel the anger or sadness or fear and say, "This too is part of me." To ask, what is this emotion trying to protect? What identity is it trying to uphold? The answers do not come immediately, but the act of asking shifts our relationship with suffering. We no longer see it as something to escape. We begin to understand that it is showing us where healing is needed. Suffering also reveals the parts of the self that still seek external validation. When we feel small, overlooked, rejected, we can trace the pain back to a desire to be confirmed from the outside. The ego craves affirmation because it doubts its own value. But when this pattern is seen clearly, something else opens, a more grounded sense of worth that does not rely on the reactions of others. Unpleasant emotions also reflect our internal conflicts. Sometimes the pain arises not because of what someone did, but because of how it clashes with how we want to see ourselves. If we pride ourselves on being calm and then feel rage, the ego reacts to the perceived contradiction. I'm not supposed to feel this. The suffering is not just the anger. It is the judgment of the anger. When we hold on to a fixed self-image, any deviation from it becomes a threat. But when we allow ourselves to be human, to hold the full range of emotions with kindness, the ego softens. It begins to see that identity can be flexible, that it is safe to feel. Emotional pain also points to our unspoken rules. The mind has many conditions. If they love me, they will act like this. If I'm a good person, I shouldn't feel that. If I succeed, then I'll be free. Each rule creates a fragile structure. When life violates the rule, the structure cracks and suffering pours in. But the pain is not proof of failure. It is a reflection of the conditional thinking we've inherited. Seeing this clearly allows us to rewrite the rules, to live with fewer conditions and more openness. The mirror of suffering is also a mirror of compassion. When we see our own patterns, our own blind spots, our own clinging, we become more forgiving of others. We realize that everyone carries wounds, that everyone is trying to protect something. And from this realization, judgment softens. We stop reacting and start understanding. This doesn't mean we accept harmful behavior, but we stop personalizing it. We see the shared humanity beneath the surface. As we continue this inner inquiry, suffering becomes less of a burden and more of a guide. Each time we feel hurt, instead of spiraling into self-pity or blame, we pause, we breathe. We ask, what is this pain pointing to? What am I being invited to see? This question does not always bring comfort. Sometimes it brings tears, but it always brings us closer to truth. That truth is not found in the story. It is found beneath the story. In the raw, unfiltered feeling, in the vulnerable place where the ego no longer knows what to do. That place is not weakness. It is the edge of awakening. When we stop defending and start feeling, something opens. We meet ourselves not as an idea, but as presence. This presence is where healing begins, not by becoming someone different, but by seeing clearly what has always been here, covered, defended, protected. The pain reveals what is ready to be seen, and once seen, it no longer controls us. It becomes part of the unfolding, a layer of identity that falls away. Suffering, when used as a mirror, becomes sacred. It shows us where we are still asleep, where the ego is still holding on, and each time we look with honesty, we grow more free. Not by force, but by understanding, by presence, by the willingness to meet what is difficult without turning away. In this way, suffering is no longer the enemy. It becomes a friend who speaks hard truths, a teacher who guides without comfort, a mirror that reflects not what we want to see, but what we need to see. And when we have the courage to look, we find that what suffers most is not the deepest part of us. What suffers is the image we are trying to maintain. What hurts is the story we are afraid to let go of. But beneath that story is something stronger, something still, something free. And that is what the mirror always points back to, our true nature, waiting quietly behind every layer we are ready to release. When suffering is seen as a mirror, reflecting the hidden architecture of the ego, we come face to face with parts of ourselves that we've long avoided. There's a raw honesty in this kind of seeing, one that strips away illusions and leaves us standing in the uncertainty of not knowing who we are without those layers. And in that space where old stories fall apart and new clarity has yet to take root, many encounter a silence that feels less like peace and more like spiritual despair. The questions become heavier. The path, once clear, turns dim. The effort begins to feel empty. In these moments, what carries us forward is not answers, it is faith. In Buddhist practice, faith, saddha, is not a passive belief in dogma or blind trust in external promises. It is an inner quality, a quiet but resilient confidence in the path, even when the terrain becomes difficult. It is what keeps us moving when nothing feels certain. Not because we are convinced everything will work out as we wish, but because something in us still remembers the truth, even when the mind forgets. Spiritual despair often comes after a period of deep effort. We've meditated, we've studied, we've reflected, we've done the work, and still suffering returns. Still, confusion clouds our insight. Still, the sense of progress fades. This can lead to disillusionment, not just with the world, but with the practice itself. We begin to wonder if any of it matters, if liberation is real, or if we are simply chasing another idea. This stage is not a detour. It is part of the path. And it is precisely here that faith becomes essential. Not the kind of faith that demands certainty, but the kind that allows space for doubt without collapse. It is a faith built on something deeper than mood or result. It grows from direct experience, the moments when the mind was clear, the heart was open, and suffering loosened its grip, even if briefly. Faith is what allows us to trust those moments, even when we can't recreate them. This kind of trust doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be convinced. It is a simple willingness to keep going, to keep sitting, to keep breathing, to keep looking inward, even when the mind whispers, "What's the point?" That whisper is familiar to all sincere practitioners. It visits in periods of dryness, when insight seems distant and effort feels futile. But it is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that something deeper is being asked of us. Faith is what allows us to stay present when the old frameworks no longer comfort us, when the beliefs we held start to dissolve and the identity we built through practice begins to feel empty. This emptiness is not the end of practice. It is the threshold. What emerges on the other side is not a new belief, but a deeper surrender. Faith carries us across that threshold. In Buddhism, faith is one of the 5 spiritual faculties, alongside effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. It is not superior, but it is foundational. Without it, the other qualities lose their grounding. Effort becomes strain, mindfulness becomes mechanical, wisdom becomes cynical. But with faith, all the other faculties are supported. Faith fuels effort with patience. It gives mindfulness meaning. It opens the heart to insight. This is not abstract. When despair comes, we can feel the body contract, the chest tightens, the breath shortens, the thoughts become heavy. In these moments, faith can be as simple as placing a hand on the heart and saying, "I don't know what's next, but I will stay with this." Not because we know where it leads, but because we trust the practice of staying. Faith also grows through remembering, reflecting on the lineage of teachers and practitioners who walked this path before us, many of whom also faced doubt, despair, and confusion. Their perseverance is part of what sustains us. It reminds us that what we are experiencing is not personal. It is human. It is part of awakening. Faith connects us to something larger than the self. This connection is especially important when spiritual ideals become internal pressure, when we compare our progress to others or to imagined standards. Faith interrupts this pattern. It reminds us that the path is not linear, that awakening is not a product to be measured. It unfolds at its own pace, often through setbacks, spirals, and silence. Sometimes faith looks like doing nothing, like resting, like allowing ourselves to be held by the earth, by breath, by the present moment. It is the courage to pause without demanding clarity, to trust that the silence is working on us, even when we can't feel it. That trust is not naive. It is mature. It grows not from fantasy, but from intimacy with our own process. Faith also helps us hold paradox. The paradox that we can be deeply committed and still feel lost. That we can love the path and still question it. that we can let go and still feel afraid. Faith doesn't resolve the paradox. It holds it. It gives us the strength to walk with it, to breathe through it, to allow it to shape us. In this way, faith becomes not just something we use in difficulty, it becomes part of who we are. It becomes the thread that weaves through every stage of practice, not clinging, not certainty, but an open-hearted willingness to continue, to meet life as it is, with humility, to trust that even when the way feels hidden, something in us knows how to take the next step. That step may be small. It may be a breath, a bow, a gentle return to the cushion, an act of kindness, a moment of honesty. These are the steps that rebuild faith, not by force, but by remembrance. Each one says, "I trust this enough to begin again." We do not have to feel inspired to have faith. We do not have to feel spiritual. We do not have to feel strong. Faith includes weakness. It includes confusion. It includes everything, because it is not a feeling. It is a relationship with the truth, with the path, with the deepest part of ourselves. This relationship is built through practice, through showing up, through staying with what is hard without needing to escape it. And through those acts, faith deepens. It becomes less about believing something and more about becoming someone who no longer turns away. Even the Buddha spoke of doubt as one of the primary hindrances. It clouds the mind and freezes the heart. But he also offered a remedy, not blind belief, but investigation, not passivity, but engagement. Faith and inquiry are not opposites. They support each other. Faith gives us the courage to ask hard questions. Inquiry gives us the clarity to deepen faith. When despair rises, when the mind collapses inward and the heart grows numb, the most radical thing we can do is stay. Stay with the breath. Stay with the body. Stay with the practice. Stay with life. That staying is not a failure. It is faith. And over time, that staying brings us through.